it will require hard work and preparation and a lot of effort.
There's some heavy lifting we need to do.
Right, they both require steady, consistent effort, resilience, and a kind of clarity of purpose.
During the competition, you need clear rules.
You need a strong team with different skills and different techniques.
Striving together in unified action for a common goal.
It needs the trained and experienced sailor who knows how to steer his boat.
Both energy transition and long-distance track races require pacing, stamina, and tactics.
So we're going to need a fair amount of endurance.
I wish this transition to be as consistent, successful, and straightforward as Michael Jordan was as a player. He broke every record.
It will also be collective sport, as either we all lose or we all win.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Eurogas Annual Conference. I'm not dressed in my sporting kit. I'm actually wearing my suit for the first time this year. Of course, the pandemic is continuing, and so we are continuing our activities online. But if we do get very busy later on, I will certainly roll up my sleeves and maybe run around the block a little bit just to make sure we can demonstrate that gas is indeed fit for 55. And that will be the theme of our conference today. And we really have got a fantastic selection of experts, industrial insiders, people who know what's going on, as well as having people from civil society, from the realms of policy, and also we're going to be put into the safe hands of one of the most talented journalists in Europe to moderate us through this whole show this afternoon. It is a great pleasure and a great honour for us today that we will be having with us the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Frans Timmermans, who will be able to give us a vision of how he sees the unfolding energy world to reach net zero in 2050. Of course, we in Eurogas fully support that, and indeed we support the targets of increased ambition for at least 55% in 2030 carbon emission reductions. But I think there's probably going to be enough from me for now. I will be back. But I would like to introduce our first welcome speaker, and that is the President of Eurogas. We're very happy to have Philippe Souquet joining us from Paris today. And Philippe, great to see you. And I think I will say, as the President of Eurogas and the CEO for Total of Gas, Renewables and Power, it would be very, very interesting to hear what you have to say about how you see gas as being fit for 55. Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James. So good afternoon and welcome European Commission Executive Vice President, Mr. Timmermans, Honourable MEP, Mr. Geyer, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for Eurogas Annual Conference, where we'll be assessing the question of whether gas is fit for 55. The last few years have seen an unprecedented increase in the speed with which the European Union is tackling the global challenge of climate change. The launch of the Green Deal and now the start of the Fit for 55 package have raised expectations as to what Europe can do to lead the fight against climate change. In Eurogas, we support clearly the objective of EU climate neutrality. And last year, we also supported the increase in ambition for 2030 to see carbon emissions reduced by at least 55%. In Eurogas, we consider that the achievement of these objectives requires the right regulatory and economic framework, the right balanced approach comprising the three basic pillars: energy efficiency, renewables, and fossil fuel decarbonization. If we fail on any of these important pillars, we will simply not reach the finishing line. The good news is that in the European gas industry, we are leading the race to develop climate solutions here in Europe. Natural gas has for a long time delivered strong carbon reduction. It is a marathon runner of this energy transition. Replacing coal and oil in power and heating has led to considerable CO2 reduction. We have seen that across the world, bringing at the same time significant improvements of air quality, contributing efficiently to balance customer demand wherever intermittent renewables were developed. We have seen it in Asia, we have seen it massively in the US, we have seen it across Europe already. And at the time, coal has still a lion's share of energy mix. And at the time, intermittent renewables are only at the very beginning of their growth, we are convinced that those benefits with ever more carbon emission reduction needs to be continued. But there is more good news to come from gas. As we go forward, we will also see biomethane and clean hydrogen enter the race in ever increasing volumes, contributing to the overall decrease of the carbon intensity of gaseous fuels. Another very good news from gas sector for Europe is that the technologies to develop deliver these biomethane and clean hydrogen molecules are and will be made in Europe. Our first panel today will explore the value that gas technologies bring to Europe, the jobs that can be created, including for high proportion, highly skilled jobs. In Eurogas, we are working with our social partners, the unions, and have this year launched a study together with Industrial and EPSU under the auspices of the European Commission. This will map the skills and training that will be needed for gas sector workers to adapt to the energy transition and to work with the new gaseous fuels that will be filling our gas pipelines. This is important. This is important as we feel that we should make sure that the energy transition is a fair transition benefiting not only to the environment, but also creating jobs, creating wealth, and benefiting more generally to the well-being of the people and communities living on our continent. Today, Europe is leading on gas technology, and we need to make sure that the Fit for 55 package not only maintains this leadership, but gives it the boost that is needed so that we can win the clean gas technology global competition. Another key aspect of the fair energy transition to come is customer satisfaction. And our second panel today will focus on this aspect, how the needed carbon reduction delivered can, thanks to gases, fit with customers' satisfaction. And this is in particular very critical for heating. In many parts of Europe, consumers are signing up to gas for heating as a very satisfactory means to escape from coal. Indeed, the European Investment Bank still finances these types of projects, where small boilers replace solid fuel burners, recognizing the benefit that gas brings, not just only to climate, but also to urban air quality too. And a recent Eurogas poll found that across Europe, gas heating was still the consumer's preferred choice for heating their homes. So if we are sensible, we must go further. We must use existing gas infrastructure to rapidly reduce the carbon intensity of the gaseous fuels used to heat homes. Indeed, blending biomethane and hydrogen into the gas infrastructure is entirely technically feasible. At the distribution level, we can blend up to 20% hydrogen into the gas mix and have little or no impact on the pipes or the gas heaters of our consumers. Consumers will not notice any difference. No new equipment, no renovation are needed to make this solution work. This is why more than 90 organizations, including Eurogas, recently called on the European Commission to recognize the role of blending in reducing carbon emission while simultaneously scaling up the volumes of hydrogen in the grid. Blending is not the end game, but it is a quick win, a fast step on the pathway to decarbonizing gas and the development of a dedicated infrastructure for hydrogen. So let us not miss this easy first step to get moving on our decarbonization pathway, utilizing the infrastructure we have already invested in. Today, during this conference, we will look at all of this good news, all of these solutions, and discuss how they can help us to get better address together the challenge of climate change. And this challenge, I confirm, in Eurogas, we consider it as achievable, and provided that we are able to find the right regulatory or financial and policy framework, achievable with a very wide acceptance of European citizens and consumers. That is why today, I am very proud to announce that Eurogas has increased its climate ambition and can state that we can achieve carbon neutrality in the gas sector before 2050. And in fact, according to our recent DNV study we published in 2020, last year, we can achieve it cost-effectively not much later than 2045. But of course, we can achieve this ambition only if the right measures and the right goals are set for the gas sector. In Eurogas, we fully believe that if there is to be a gas decarbonization package now, at the end of this year, we must see target for volumes of renewable gas consumed in the EU by 2030, at least 11% in 2030. We must see target for blending decarbonized gas in the gas infrastructure. We must see targets for the reduction of gas carbon footprint in the Fit for 55 initiative, at least 20% versus 2018. Those targets will give investors the security they need to deliver the gas technologies we need, including carbon capture and storage, electrolyzers, and anaerobic digesters. Alongside this, Eurogas is in favor of strengthened carbon pricing. The ETS is a very good tool for setting carbon prices, and we would see it in the mid to long term extended to transport and heating. In the short term, we believe, though, that the Energy Taxation Directive should introduce transitionary measures that give member states flexibility to rapidly give targeted investment signals to end users, while at the same time ensuring a harmonized approach that will facilitate the transition to carbon pricing for the EU ETS in these sectors. We also know that methane emission must be managed responsibly. As a signatory of the methane guiding principles and an active participant to the development of the OGMP 2.0 reporting framework, we welcome the focus of the recent European Commission methane strategy on measurement, reporting, and verification, leak detection and repair across the value chain. We believe that a clear pathway and a supportive regulatory framework can help address the issue of methane emissions more comprehensively across Europe. This also applies to methane mitigation across agriculture and waste through biomethane production, which can cut methane emissions from Europe's largest emission source. Finally, the last subject I want to stress this afternoon is our desire to see the development of a level playing field between technologies to leverage the potential of all viable decarbonization options. EU policies for all technologies and energy carriers should be based on full life cycle analysis, which considers greenhouse gas emission and avoidance costs, covering energy, infrastructure, and end-user equipment costs. Energy system costs, including incentive and subsidies, should be allocated without cross-subsidization between energy carriers. If we do this, we can win the race in Europe, not just only for the reduction of greenhouse gases, but also to be the leader in clean technology manufacturing and thus reap the rewards of being a technology producer and not only a consumer. As a summary, in Eurogas, we are convinced that gas is really fit for 55 and that over the coming years, the role of gas in achieving the climate ambition of Europe will be critical. Ladies and gentlemen, let's enjoy the conference, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Philippe, and thank you for those great uplifting words that you've given us today, telling us all about the things that we need to know, the great opportunities we have here in Europe, not just, as you say, to be a great leader in the deployment of the technologies we need for net zero, but also to make them and get the jobs. And you touched on the themes of the first and the second panel very, very succinctly. I think it's also very important that we also consider the commitment that you've also outlined, how Eurogas sees the possibility of gas becoming net zero or decarbonised, if you like, even earlier than 2050 under the right framework conditions. So this is a very positive statement and a very strong message of intent from the industry. And it gives me great pleasure to hear that from you today. So thank you, Philippe. We will see you again shortly. So I will say thanks very much to Philippe, and we will be bringing him back. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Frans Timmermans. He is the man who is dealing with all of the different factions, if you like, all of the different teams who are vying to try and say, how are we going to best achieve this vision of net zero? And so I think, Mr. Timmermans, all of our viewers, and there are 750 registrants, so there's probably quite a lot of people out there, we're very happy to hear how you see the vision of how we're going to go forward, achieve that objective of net zero by 2050, and the role that different technologies will play, and how Europe can be a leader, not just in deployment, but also in the manufacturing of all of the great technologies that we will need. Good afternoon, Mr. Timmermans, please. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to your annual meeting. Indeed, I would like to share a couple of ideas we have at the European Commission of how we get to climate neutrality by 2050. You know, when we came up with the Green Deal over a year ago, the idea was not just to commit to climate neutrality in 2050, but to also demonstrate very clearly how to get there, what this would mean for 2030, what this would mean for the period between 2030 and 2050, and what this would mean for the whole of the economy. How can we reset our economy on a growth path which does not need carbon, which is circular, et cetera, et cetera. So that was how we started. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And initially, some people were saying, well, we like your Green Deal, but come back in 10 years' time when we've recovered from the pandemic and we'll see what we'll do then. But since then, we've seen that the crisis that followed the pandemic, which is far from over, by the way, the crisis that followed the pandemic left us with an extra challenge. We will have to invest massively to get growth back, to make sure jobs come back, et cetera, et cetera. But if we don't do this in a sustainable way, if we don't use this opportunity to also set our economy and our society on a path of growth within planetary boundaries, then we would have missed an opportunity. And I say this because I believe that although I'm, of course, very happy that so much money is now being mobilized to invest in our society and our economy, the pitfall here is, the danger here is that we spend it on the wrong things. We've done that in the past in an economic crisis. And if we spend all this money, or too much of it, or a part of it, on economic structures that have very little future, then we will burden our children and grandchildren with unsupportable debt. They will not be able to pay it back. And by the way, we will then also never be able to reach our climate goals. And then the temperature will rise substantially above 2 degrees. And then we will reach a number of tipping points, which will mean that humanity would no longer be in control of its own destiny. If we get this wrong, our children will be fighting wars over water and over food. So we need to get it right. And we need to get it right urgently, because we see already now, with the slight recovery we've seen, emissions are going back to pre-pandemic level quite quickly. And we need to avoid that from happening. So what we need to do is extremely urgent. It sounds a long way in the future, 2050 or even 2030. Certainly for politicians who in this unstable political era are thinking about the next election rather than their children and grandchildren. But we now have an incredible opportunity, also as politicians, to start putting things in the framework of what are we going to do for our kids. And I find this extremely exciting, also on a personal level, that we're now doing things not for ourselves, we're doing it for our children and grandchildren. I think this could have a mobilizing effect on wider society. So moving quickly to the energy sector, because the energy sector is crucial in this transition. We've made huge progress in deploying renewable energy. Technologies are also advancing, but our energy system still relies heavily on fossil fuels, 75%. We already know that by 2050, our energy system will have to change completely, fundamentally. At the end of that road, there will be no more space for coal, very little room for oil, and only a marginal role for fossil gas. This is not only because science tells us, it is also because the market shows us. So instead of waiting for the inevitable and face ever higher costs of transition, it's better to adapt, prepare, and adopt new sustainable business models. I think it is a truism that the longer you wait, the more expensive it becomes. What does that mean for us in Europe? What does it mean for industry? What does it mean for our citizens? First, I think we have to decarbonize our power sector as soon as possible and electrify new sectors, such as road transport and parts of the industry. electrify what can be electrified, I would say. By 2050, we will need 10 times more solar and onshore wind power. We will also take our offshore wind capacity from 12 gigawatts to 300 gigawatts. And this, by the way, is paying for itself. The economic opportunity is huge, and there's huge investment in that area. As we connect these new technologies to our power grids, we will be able to take old polluting technologies offline. The most urgent step we need to take is to shut down coal-fired power plants. 21 of our member states are either coal-free or have committed to coal phase-out. It is encouraging to see these commitments picking up pace as the growth of renewable energy drives down demand for coal. But in reality, closures are happening much faster than phase-out plans, simply because coal is no longer a competitive source of electricity in Europe. You can compare it to what we've seen during the Trump years in the United States, such a strong political commitment to coal, and he would dig up more coal, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that really happened was the closure of pits and the diminishing of coal as part of the energy mix. So simply by market forces, there's no ideology behind it. The ideology didn't work because the ideology was, let's keep digging coal. And the market said, nope, we have alternatives. So I think this is something we should never forget. So it's also important that timetables for phase out do not turn into a liability and an obligation for governments to keep dirty power plants online with taxpayers' money, because you need to do the math. How much does it cost to keep a pit open that produces coal that nobody wants to buy? How much is the cost on the taxpayer? How much is the cost on the environment? And how much is the cost on the people working in that industry if their transition to new jobs, new skills is delayed? Today, we can leapfrog from coal to clean energy, but this is not always possible at the scale that we need and as quickly as we need. Where and as long as clean energy cannot yet be deployed on the scale needed, fossil gas may still play a role in the transition from coal to zero emission electricity. But I want to be crystal clear with you. Fossil fuels have no viable future. That also goes for fossil gas in the longer run. The future is in carbon-free electricity and in decarbonized gas sector, which embraces hydrogen as a new energy carrier and green hydrogen as the final destination. The second area that will see major change is the transport sector. Today, it is running mainly on fossil fuels, and contrary to emissions from power generation, emissions from transport have been rising. But by 2050, we will need to reduce them by 90%. We will need a lot more zero-emission cars on our roads and the infrastructure to facilitate that. Part of it is psychological. Instead of thinking, what car will I buy? People must be thinking, how can I get from A to B? And picking their transport options accordingly. But I, for one, know perfectly well how emotionally tied we are to our cars. It is something that is part of our culture. And this is not something you can change overnight. But I do see with the youngest generation, if I look at the millennials, but especially Generation Z, they have a completely different attitude toward cars and transport. They just want to get from A to B without too much hassle. And I think that's the future. We will also need aviation and maritime transport to become cleaner, including through clean fuels. And this is biofuels. You can blend fuels. You can look for synthetic fuels, and then hydrogen can play a role, or hydrogen-based fuels. There's so many things we need to do. We need to limit short-haul flights and make collective travel under 500 kilometers climate neutral. That means more trains and cleaner public transport. Across Europe, it's a change already happening. The night train is back, and airlines are linking tickets with high-speed rail, creating a win-win situation. A win-win-win situation for the airlines, for the rail sector, and for the environment, and for the citizen. Got to add a fourth winner. We need to bring the transition already happening in power plants and industrial parks to our roads, our railways, ports and airports, and to our offices and homes. This brings me to my third point, buildings. A large share of the change has to happen in our homes. The heating and cooling technologies, the energy efficiency of our appliances, and the building stock itself. We need to double our building renovation rate to make our homes more efficient and reduce our energy use. This also helps drive down energy bills for consumers and spurs local construction jobs. Near zero standards for new buildings and minimum energy efficiency performance standards for buildings will drive the change. We also need to see a much higher share of heating produced from electricity rather than fossil fuels. We can do this by accelerating the deployment of heat pumps and putting in place district heating solutions. There are families in Europe that are still burning coal or wood to keep their houses warm, and the toll on their health is huge. Our first step must be to get rid of coal so that Europeans in the most polluted regions can breathe freely again. You know that we lose 400,000 Europeans every year prematurely because of air pollution. We really need to do something about this. For some member states where there are no other affordable options, gas will have to play a transitional role for a limited period of time. I was discussing this also yesterday with the Polish government, because Poland will be one of those countries where this will be necessary. I think we made it clear now and again that electrification is our end game in many areas. It's the fastest route to decarbonization for most, and the most energy efficient solution in many end-use sectors. But electrification will not be the answer everywhere. Some hard-to-abate sectors, think about steel, heavy transport, aviation, maritime sector, will need alternative solutions. Clean hydrogen can be a game changer. In Europe, we aim to stay ahead of the curve and create a strong European hydrogen market. For this to happen, we need three ingredients: supply, demand, and infrastructure. We expect markets to scale up hydrogen supply. Our hydrogen strategy aims for 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity producing green hydrogen in Europe by 2030. If we work well with the regions bordering on Europe, North Africa and the East, we can double that to 80 gigawatts of green hydrogen capacity. In North Africa, Morocco, Libya, Algeria, they're already producing cheap renewable electricity from solar energy. Producing hydrogen becomes an interesting option. Today, these countries depend on revenues from fossil fuels. A decade from now, they could be selling clean energy. Same goes for Ukraine and for Russia, hopefully. A year ago, our hydrogen targets were seen as unachievable. Now it looks like we might overshoot them in the next decade. The market might go faster than our biggest dreams on this. We also support the production of biogas, which can offer new opportunities for cleaner energy systems, but also opportunities for farmers in Europe and additional revenues for our rural areas. We need to develop the concept of carbon farming, both in terms of carbon sink and in terms of production of renewable energy. But working on supply is not enough. You can't flood the European market with hydrogen and expect industries to absorb it within the next decade. Supportive policy frameworks will be needed to help generate demand for renewable and low carbon fuels in the transitional period until these fuels become fully competitive. We're looking at options to make this happen, for example, via carbon contracts for difference. Recovery and resilience facility funding could make a big difference, and we encourage member states to use this opportunity. The final element is infrastructure. We're very clear on this point. Europe doesn't need to invest in any new infrastructure for carrying fossil gas. Instead, we should be thinking about retrofitting existing pipelines to transport hydrogen. This can be done at about 25% of the cost of building brand new pipelines. Our flagship policy framework for trans-European energy infrastructure, 10E regulation, was reviewed last December to support both electrification and the uptake of renewable and low carbon gases. Let me just say that I count on your industry not to see hydrogen, e-fuels and biomethane as a fig leaf or a side activity. They will become the new mainstream. Our policy will reflect that. And I trust that your investment decisions will reflect that as well. The direction is set, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. The path will require new policies, which we will present in June. This summer, the Commission will present our Fit for 55 package of legislation, which around a dozen proposals will help us put the European economy on the right track. The package will include a reform of the EU ETS and a possible extension to buildings and to transport. We need a strong carbon price signal to drive investments in clean power and clean gases. We will also propose new renewable energy and energy efficiency targets and new CO2 standards for cars. As part of the review of the Renewable Energy Directive, we will propose a fully fledged scheme for hydrogen certification, including renewable and low carbon hydrogen, but also other low carbon and renewable fuels such as biogas and synthetic fuels. Robust, clear and reliable certification is an important first step to allow for renewable and low carbon gases to be traded across Europe. But we also need new market rules. This will be the main focus of the review of the gas market legislation, which we will adopt by the end of this year to support the uptake of renewable and low carbon gases and the development of an EU hydrogen market. During our transition away from fossil fuels, we also have to make sure that fossil gas doesn't move us further away from our climate ambition. That is why we will also propose in December new rules to reduce methane emissions in the oil, gas, and coal sector. We have to address the problem of leaks throughout the fossil gas fuel value chain and work with our international partners to create new standards. While Europe makes this essential transition, it is absolutely vital that we don't push our CO2 emissions across the board. In climate crisis is a global crisis, and emissions must go down all over the world. We will propose a carbon border adjustment mechanism in June, designed to prevent the risk of such carbon leakage. The more ambition other economies show in their climate regulations, the less it will be necessary to apply this tool. Let me finish with the most important point. We must ensure that this transition is just, or there just will be no transition. The Green Deal includes a strong first proposal. We need to make sure that our proposals help create a just transition through the just transition mechanism, but throughout all the policies we will present. We need to make sure that all the money we put in there will make it possible to leave no one behind. And I think this is extremely important because if you look at the political spectrum across the European Union, if people have the impression they will be left behind in this transition, they will prevent this transition from happening. So it's in everyone's interest that we leave no one behind. It's not just a moral point. For me, the moral point should be enough. But for those for whom the moral point is not so important, the economic point should then prevail, and the economic point only makes sense if we take everybody along in this transition. Yes, there are many places, coal mining regions. I come from a coal mining region myself, where the transition will be difficult, but also comes with incredible opportunity if we make the right investments. Given our demographics, we will need everyone to work in the new economy. But then everyone will have the skills to be able to work in the new economy, and this demands a lot of both the private sector and public authorities to make this happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, coal will be the first fossil fuel to retire from our European energy mix. But we have to present the coal mining regions with a future that is interesting, enticing, that is exciting, and this is possible. But after we have successfully dealt with that transition, fossil gas is also a fuel that will need to be scaled back at considerable speed as we pursue the transition to net zero. I really want to welcome the fact that you are engaging constructively in this transition, because we need everyone in Europe to embrace the growth potential of the Green Deal and get started with the transition. Make no mistake, the only free ride in a race to net zero is a ride over the cliff edge, and that's something we cannot afford to do. We have a responsibility for future generations, and both the scary situation we're in today and the exciting situation we're in today, the steps we will take in the next couple of years will determine whether we will be successful in coming to terms with the climate crisis, in coming to terms with the Industrial Revolution, in coming to terms with the fact that we need to leave our children a better society. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Timmermans, I think the ladies and gentlemen of the audience will certainly agree that was a very powerful vision for the future, and I really thank you for giving out such a strong view about how you see all the different sectors and the interplay, the roles of specific vectors. I think that in Eurogas we can honestly say that much of what you've said is falling onto fertile ground. We understand the role that we need to play, the role of natural gas, directly going through the transition phase, moving into hydrogen, embracing biomethane, addressing methane emissions. These are all things that are indeed very close to the agenda that we are pursuing, as well you know. I think you are free for a couple of questions, if that's possible. In that case, you raised the point about industries not putting fig leaves over them to try and show the energy transition. I'm glad that we have Philippe Sorquet from Total, as Total have become the world's largest biomethane production, as they're famous for many other things. This is an acquisition they've made recently, and I think this is therefore a very good point to say that here you have a company that is definitely showing that is not looking for fig leaves, it's looking for solutions. Philippe, if you'd like to take the floor, I won't need to introduce you because you're on just before the Executive Vice President.
Yeah, thank you, James, and thank you, Mr. Timmermans, for your work. I would say, as James said, that we are in phase with what you said. We are in phase with the direction that we need to follow. We are in phase with the urgency of having this transition start and running full speed. But to be more precise, because now we are industrial, we need to have signals to take a decision. We need to have very soon very detailed and very clear measures. So one of the measures that we had been proposing in Eurogas in the gas industry is in fact a target for 2030 for the reduction of the greenhouse gas intensity of gaseous fuels, and we have been proposing at least 20% of reduction of this carbon content. And we have also been expressing ourselves in favor of a target for the development of renewable gas with some 11% of biogas, renewable gas in the mix, or green hydrogen for 2030. So are you in favor of those measures? How do you consider the Commission support to these measures?
Well, I fully understand your question, and what I can say to you today is that we're looking into all possibilities in preparation of our proposals that we will present by June. So I take careful note of what you're saying, but you will understand that in this very sensitive phase of devising our proposals, I cannot react very concretely to what you're saying, but I welcome your message. It is very clear, and it will help decarbonize the energy sector. So I think I will have to ask you for some patience until June.
Will come from Annie Christ, who's the CEO of GasTerra, which I'm sure you're familiar, Mr. Timmermans. She's also the Vice President of the board at Eurogas. Annie, nice to have you with us today, and I hope you've got good weather up there. But please feel free to ask the question to Mr. Timmermans.
Yes, thank you very much, James, and thank you very much, Mr. Timmermans, for your motivational speech, the dedication, the commitment. Thank you very much for stressing the exciting points. That's I think it's very important to keep that in mind, that it's also very exciting times and not only difficult times. And also thank you for the clarity on the fact that you say that gas only has a minor transitional role to play. I mean, it's clear, and it's always good to have clarity. So thank you for that as well. I must say that yesterday, after I decided on the question I would put forward today, I received a push message regarding a plan that's apparently going to be revealed on the 21st of April about very efficient gas-fired power plants. So I asked myself, shall I put another question forward? But you never should do that. So I decided to stick to the plan. That's always very important, especially when it comes to this topic. So I stick to my plan. And my question is the following. We know that the European Commission is examining an extension of the ETS to transport, for example, but also to buildings. And what we in Eurogas have asked ourselves is, how effective a coupling of the built environment, or more specifically, a swift coupling of the built environment to the ETS would be. We see the avoidance cost, the cost curves for decarbonization differ enormously. They differ enormously between sectors, but they also differ between countries. We see very big difference in cost curves, for example, when it comes to buildings, low temperature heat. And we see a risk of delaying action in difficult to carbonize sectors, for example, in buildings in countries with high cost curves. And as you stressed so much rightfully, we can't afford ourselves any delay. And we wonder if that would happen. We see an under-delivery of sectors of member states. That might lead to additional regulation, for example, blending obligations or taxations. And would that not have an effect on ETS pricing? And would that then not be, perhaps even be dangerous for sectors that are now functioning within a well-functioning ETS? First, do you consider this is a threat too? And to take it a bit further, and that might sound a bit weird coming from our mouths, wouldn't it be better, at least for the short term, and as a transition measure, to price carbon through taxation, and for the time being not in the ETS? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Fascinating questions, and this issue comes with a lot of dilemmas, and we will have to make a number of tough judgment calls. And you've described the situation extremely well. First of all, I do believe the ETS system has huge global importance, and the markets are waiting for it. The fact that we are now at a carbon price of around 40 euros per ton is also because the market expects us to become stricter, to limit the free allowances, to look into new sectors. So, and not just in Europe. The talks I've been having with John Kerry always also revolve around ETS and how to price carbon. And then ETS is a system, of course, because it's partially already introduced in the United States, that they're seriously considering also at the federal level. China is now deploying its own ETS system. So I think the logic behind the ETS system, also because it is by now well understood in the markets, is going to be the basis of how we're going to move forward. Now, that being said, in very general terms, then we have to see whether the choices we make in specific sectors are rational, expanding it to ETS, transport, buildings. And we're in the middle of assessing that, as you know. And there are pros and cons against that. And I think taxing carbon would also be a possibility. But if we can come up with a system that is clear, that is understood across the European Union, that has the potential to grow, then I think that would be better than having especially different member states using different taxation systems to reach the same goal. But then we have to have a convincing, transparent, convincing system that works and that can be adopted by public authorities as well as the market. We have to make sure the market is also fair. There has to be a level playing field between energy carriers. And there I don't know at this stage whether ETS can on its own bring this level playing field. We cannot have, for instance, electricity, which is covered by the ETS, compete against fossil gas and heating, where a totally different carbon price applies, or there is no carbon price. These are things we have to confront. That would not be fair. And then we also have to take into account that some member states already have carbon taxation, and all have other forms of taxation on fossil fuel used for transport and heating. So the Energy Tax Directive applies minimum taxes on fossil fuels for different uses. So it is a complex situation. Now we're looking at options, as I said, for the Fit for 55 package. Will we extend the ETS to transport and buildings? It's still being analyzed. It would deliver an economically efficient manner, I think, to increase our climate ambition of 55% reduction by 2030. Could create certainty in the market, but on the other hand, we have to make sure it's also functional. It's also possible. It doesn't create excessive administrative burden, for instance, or it doesn't undermine other measures we're saying. I would not like an ETS system, for instance, in transport, to undermine the CO2 emissions regulation, to give you one example. So I'm sorry, again, the full clarity will come in June, but I just wanted you to understand that the dilemmas you've been talking about are our dilemmas as well, and I'm trying to give you an indication of how we're developing our thinking right now.
No, thank you, and thank you for the answers, Executive Vice President. We fully understand that we can look forward to later on this year in June, and probably later on as well for the gas decarbonisation package. Simply to reiterate, I think from the members of Eurogas, we see it very important that targets are set for the decarbonisation and renewable gases, simply to also underpin the targets that have already been set in things like the hydrogen strategy. And Annie's point, definitely we are supportive of the ETS, but we do say that perhaps for a short mid-term period, taxation could be a good way to go in directions of buildings and transport. So we will leave our points with you there for you to think about, and we will look very much forward to seeing the legislative proposals that you have. I would like to thank you on behalf of all of the Eurogas members and the Eurogas team for spending your time with us, giving us a great motivational speech and a true vision for how you would see the coming 30 years. And we have to wish you bon courage, for there is a very, very big plate in front of you. And we are indeed, of course, very, very interested to see how that will eventually evolve. Thank you for coming with us today. And if we were live, we'd give you a round of applause, but it always seems a bit weird on video. So I'll simply stop with thank you. Yes, thank you. And we'll look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Annie. Thank you for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we aren't finished there. We still have a very important keynote speaker coming up, representing the European Parliament. And the European Parliament has been very busy looking at what the European Commission have been promoting and proposing for how they're going to lead the Green Deal and eventually the Fit for 55 package, as Mr. Timmermans has suggested. Today we're joined by Mr. Jens Geier, who has been leading the hydrogen report through the European Parliament. He's the pilot, the rapporteur in Brussels speak, and he has successfully passed the first hurdle, just got his report through the Industry and Energy Committee. And so, Mr. Geier, very, very grateful to have you with us today, and we're very interested to hear how you also see the evolution and the use of hydrogen and the gas system within Europe from now to 2030 and beyond. Mr. Geier, welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
I'm a little bit concerned that you might hear the same speech that France has done with different words, but I hopefully will give the whole thing a little bit of a new angle. So thank you very much for having invited me to give this keynote speech at your annual conference. I will do my very best, as I said, to bring in some more aspects. I'm convinced that the topic you have chosen for this year's conference, Gas Fit for 55, is of utmost relevance for the gas sector and also for the European Union as a whole. The European Union, its economy and its energy system indeed need to become fit for the future, fit for achieving our climate objectives of 2030 and for climate neutrality in 2050. During this transformation to a decarbonized EU, we need to make sure that we not only undertake significant efforts. Okay. So I have to change the screen to read my text, so probably that brings a problem. Okay, but then you have to bear it for the moment, because I'm having it only on iPad now, so probably we have to. Okay, so I go again. During this transformation to a decarbonized EU, we need to make sure that we not only undertake significant efforts to save our climate, but also maintain a strong and competitive European economy and high quality costs, and achieve the transition in a socially just way, because, as Franz said, otherwise the transition will fail. The energy transition has a major role to play in this regard, as affordable and reliable energy is an important element to ensure economic competitiveness of companies, as well as the high living standards for our citizens. We also have to fight energy poverty on our way to a climate neutral Europe. Therefore, we need to get the energy transition right. We need to continue to decarbonize our energy system and base it more and more on renewable energy sources, all while providing sufficient, reliable and affordable energy to all citizens and companies at all times. In this enormous challenge, gas is an important element. And with gas, I refer to all of its different types: natural gas, low carbon gas, and renewable gas. They all have their role to play in the energy transition, even though in the long term, our goal needs to be achieving a fully renewables-based energy system, including only renewable gas. I would even say that we need to get to that point as soon as possible. Nonetheless, think tanks like SEP's Energy Climate House think that natural gas demand is projected to remain more or less stable until 2030. It will be especially important for countries that are heavily relying on coal in their energy mix. These countries need to phase out coal as soon as possible and require energy solutions that can be implemented quickly in order to maintain energy security. Natural gas can be such a solution. However, this is only true for the short and medium term. And the long term, also these countries need to transition to renewable energy sources. This is essential for them to become fit for the future, to provide sustainable job perspectives to their citizens, and to quickly catch up with those countries in the EU that are already moving towards a mainly renewables-based energy system now. Our goal needs to be to close this gap in sustainability across countries, and not to shift it from coal versus gas and renewables to gas versus renewables. This is why we have to make sure that natural gas remains only a bridging technology and should actually be replaced by renewable solutions as soon as possible. We should not invest in significant new infrastructure for natural gas, but rather already start investing in long-term solutions and renewable gases. This means that gas infrastructure that is built now needs to be ready for use of renewable future-proof gases such as renewable hydrogen. We have to avoid stranded assets and carbon lock-ins. We also have to keep these concerns in mind when considering low-carbon gases. There can be bridging technologies on our way to the ramp-up of renewable gases. I'm particularly thinking about low-carbon hydrogen here. We do not have sufficient renewable energy and electrolyzer capacities right now to produce sufficient amounts of renewable hydrogen, but we want to establish a competitive European hydrogen economy as fast as possible, as hydrogen can contribute significantly to carbonization. Thus, we need low-carbon hydrogen that we can provide sooner and in larger amounts, transitionally to create a market and demand for hydrogen, which will ultimately help renewable hydrogen to become competitive. Here, we have to make sure that the technologies needed to decarbonize gas, mainly CCU and CCS, are environmentally safe and accepted by our citizens. This means we either need to work on public acceptance for CCS or find ways to directly employ mainly renewable gases to be able to contribute to achieving our climate goals. Nonetheless, we cannot solely concentrate on ramping up low-carbon gases now. Here again, we have to avoid stranded assets. We can thus say that the time to prepare the ground for the rollout of renewable gases, such as renewable hydrogen, has come. These renewable gases will be essential for a climate-neutral Europe, even in the long term, as electrification alone cannot satisfy European energy needs, especially in sectors that are hard to decarbonize and in which electrification is not or not yet an option, such as heavy industry like steel, aviation, or maritime transport. Renewable gases are an important option. They can also provide flexibility and storage opportunities that are needed to guarantee security of supply in an energy system based increasingly on intermittent renewable energy sources. We need to prepare the necessary production and transport infrastructure, provide necessary feedstock for biogas and biomethane, and deploy significant additional renewable energy for the production of renewable hydrogen. I would thus ask the gas industry to fully support and further move into this renewable gas direction. We need the industry to continue to work on innovative and clean solutions, infrastructure, and production capacities. I believe that we can count on you for this future-oriented transition for the gas industry. For me, as a trade unionist, it is also important that the companies take on board their employees for this transition. And upskilling measures, safety trainings to deal with renewable gases, dialogues with employees about their innovative ideas for the future of the gas sectors, and collaboration with social partners are only some ideas about how this can be done. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware that the industry cannot do this transition alone. It needs renewable gases to be a viable business case. It needs predictability. It needs political support, a strong regulatory framework, policy incentives to create demand for renewable gases, and investment support. The European Union is on the best way to provide that. We have started with the industrial strategy, animating industry to decarbonize and therefore creating demand for renewable gases. Then came the hydrogen strategy. Here, the European Parliament is clear and ambitious. We need renewable gases such as renewable hydrogen, and we want to do all it takes to guarantee a fast ramp up and competitive European market. We want to offer support and reduce regulatory barriers. Also, the bridging role for low carbon gases is recognized, all while underlining that the ultimate goal needs to be renewable. We are also currently working on the revision of the 10E regulation. Here, I want to emphasize the need to focus on support for infrastructure for renewable energy sources, including renewable gases. We are all now waiting impatiently for the legislative proposals by the Commission. Franz have spoken about that, to finally set the concrete regulatory framework for the transition. The Fit for 55 package will be the next big step into this direction, especially the revision of the third energy package for gas, which I expect to regulate competitive, decarbonized gas markets, will be crucial for a successful transition of the gas sector. In these proposals, I expect the Commission to clearly state the importance for renewable gases. They need to be the focus in infrastructure and investment support considerations. The package gives us the chance to draw a clear picture of the energy sector and the sustainable clean gas sector that we want to see for the future. And it is a change for you to get predictability and a clear pathway to follow. We all together need to take this chance and pave the way to a climate neutral Europe in cooperation, not opposition, and with innovation, not path dependency. We need to make it a tool for socially just decarbonization and not a break. And this is the appeal which with which I would like to end this keynote speech. Let's work together on the European transition to climate neutrality and on the transition to the gas sector, gas sector to a concentration of renewable gases. The gas sector is important for European competitiveness and citizens' well-being, but it can only remain important and fulfill its role when we make it future-proof. It is our duty as politicians to facilitate that transition, and we need your support, your creativity, innovative ideas and input to make it right. Let's stay in touch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Geyer. It's been a great pleasure to hear you today. And indeed, I think the things that you've said have really struck a chord with us in the gas industry. Certainly in Eurogas, many of the points that you raised are things that we strongly also share and believe. And also, when we looked at your report, we were very pleased to see the direction that you are also pushing the hydrogen developments in Europe in. I think that we can say that the element that you mentioned around just transition is truly important to us. We have Industrial on a panel coming up shortly after your intervention. We believe very strongly in what we call our social dialogue between we, the employers, represented through Eurogas, and Industrial and EPSU, representing the unions and the workers, so that we can work together to plot the pathway from here to 2050, so we have the right skills, the right training for the people in the gas sector. As you rightly say, there will be opportunities here, and indeed, I think your words are indeed very, I would say, enticing, to use a word that Mr. Timmermans put forward for us. I would say that that is true. These are enticing. These are opportunities for people as we move in this gas, in the direction of gas, into decarbonisation. You mentioned the low carbon hydrogen also is an important technology to get there, and ultimately to develop more and more renewable gases. These are the things that we also see that are important. We are very keen, as you know, on targets. We would like to see targets. We know those aren't there in the report yet, but we do believe that that is a great way to make sure that we fulfil the potential that we have to achieve the vision that you've laid out and the vision that we heard earlier from the Executive Vice President. Mr. Geyer, I thank you greatly for joining us today. I know you're very busy, and so it is really a great pleasure for us and for all of the ladies and gentlemen of the audience to hear your views, especially as you pilot probably one of the most important reports that's going through the European Parliament at this very stage, at this very moment. And we wish you, again, bon courage for you and good luck for the plenary vote. We hope that it's a successful one.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are running slightly behind schedule, but I think you'll forgive us for that. We've had a very good opening session with the Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans, and with MEP Jens Geyer, both giving us a great visionary statements on how they see the future of the gas sector and even broader, how they see the future of the energy system and the economy in Europe. Our next sessions will start to look at some of those issues in more detail. We will be opening up, looking at the opportunities that we will get from developing clean and renewable gases in the European Union, looking at the technological benefits, and then we'll move on to look at, indeed, how the building sector, one of the largest emitters of CO2, can also be tackled, and the technologies we have and the technologies we can use together to get to the point that we need to be. The good news, ladies and gentlemen, is that I am finished being your moderator for the time being, and we now have a real professional to come in and take over. And it's always my great pleasure to see Sasha Twining joining us, because here we have really the embodiment of professionalism and journalism. And so, Sasha, as a BBC World, Radio 4, I would say sort of star, it's always a great pleasure for us to have you in Eurogas, and we are really looking forward to you taking us through the next few panels. I can sort of wipe my head and go, phew, over to the professional, and, you know, really looking forward to these panels, and great to have you with us again. Sasha, the floor is yours. We're really looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
James, thank you very much. You flatter me. It is a delight to be with you again as your independent moderator for the next couple of panels. As James, as you've said, we are running slightly behind time, so I'm going to crack straight on with the first panel. All I will say is thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for listening. This is where I would say very firmly the floor is yours as well. You're about to hear some really interesting comments and opinions and thoughts from people that Eurogas has invited from throughout the industry, but it's you that I want to hear from. The floor will be yours for questions, and I will attempt to get as many questions in from as many people as we go through the next two panels. It is always very tricky. I know this very well. Very tricky when it is in a virtual environment like this, but I will do my very best to ensure that you have your voice and your opinions heard. So On your computer screen, or however you are joining us this afternoon, there will be a question and answer box. And may I encourage you to put in any thoughts, any questions, any comments as soon as you think of them. And I will try and bring them in as soon as possible. And we'll try and get as much chatter and conversation going as we can. So let's crack on with our first panel, and allow me to introduce the four guests that we have here. And if you would raise your hand as I introduce you, for those who are watching who may not be overly familiar with yourself, but obviously will be from the area that you represent. First of all, Annegret Grubel, President of the Board of Directors at CEER, the Council of European Energy Regulators. Annegret, thank you very much for joining us today. Helga Hagen, the Senior Vice President for Gas and Power at Equinor. Thank you, Helga. Dieter Schramm, who's the Head of Department of Political Affairs and Government Relations at Bosch. So you seem to be very much out of this world at the moment with your virtual background there. It's always a delight when we get people who've decided to change their backgrounds. And then finally joining us, Judith Curtin-Darling, who's the Deputy General Secretary at Industrial for Europe. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. You have seen our panelists now. Please feel free to already start putting questions into the question and answer box. We'll get as much of a conversation going as possible. The theme of this first panel is, can the EU capitalise on its clean gas tech leadership? And Eurogas has offered a few minutes at the start of the panel for each of the panellists to outline their thoughts. And Judith, I'm going to come to you first, because I'm very aware that we haven't got you for all that long. So Judith, if you'd like to outline your thoughts and opinions first, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And thank you very much to Eurogas for the invitation to speak as part of the annual general meeting. As James said, we take our sectoral social dialogue in the gas sector very seriously in Industrial Europe, together with our partner in the public sector federation, EPSU. And as we stated in a joint sectoral social dialogue statement last year, at the end of the year, climate neutrality is really our shared ambition across both social partners. For Industrial Europe, we represent about 7 million workers in Europe's manufacturing, mining and energy sector. And we are fully signed up to climate neutrality by 2050. Our focus isn't so much on targets, but much more on concretely how we're going to get there. Our workers want the roadmaps and the guarantees that there's a plan for the investment, a plan for the transition, a plan for the infrastructure, a plan which brings everybody along with it. And for us, that means an agenda around just transition. We've heard that phrase a couple of times already today. And we know that decarbonisation, which we're set on as Europe, in just 3 decades is an unprecedented challenge. We know that as workers in the gas sector, that there's no significant space for unabated natural gas in a net zero scenario. And that means for Europe's gas workers, 220,000 jobs in Europe. We're on the verge of a radical transformation over these decades, which we know will be mainly driven, as we've heard from the opening speeches, by renewable gas, low emissions, hydrogen, and fundamental changes in the sector. The shift in ambition in Europe, the move to minus 55% in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction compared to the minus 40% objective, actually effectively means a doubling of the efforts which are needed to reduce emissions by 2030. And we know that there are limits to electrification in a large number of sectors, including problems in terms of availability of renewables and questions about storage, which will have to be addressed. So renewable gases for us and the gas industry has a crucial place in the mix as a transition fuel, but also in terms of that long-term agenda around the decarbonisation of other industries, the development of clean gas tech, hydrogen and biogas. We believe very strongly that in order to build that just transition, we need to have a strong industrial policy agenda which addresses jobs right through the value chain. And that means also addressing those manufacturing jobs within the energy equipment manufacturing chain. So it's with real concern that we see today in Europe large-scale restructuring, which is moving some of key R&D and production capacity actually outside Europe to low-cost locations, challenging the capacity of Europe industrially to play its full role in this clean tech transition. So we want Europe to lead in terms of the clean gas technologies, but actually fundamentally we want Europe to lead in showing that just transition is not just a slogan, but it's a reality for our members and their communities. The Paris Agreement, the European Green Deal are absolutely necessary, but we should recognise that they're deliberate political interventions into market forces. The decision to intervene, to internalise external costs of climate change is something we want to see, but politicians have to take the responsibility for what the consequences of those actions are. And that means having a just transition framework for the workforce and our communities. As mentioned in the opening speech by Philippe, we have a joint project with Eurogas and EPTHU that we're just starting in our sectoral social dialogue to lay out what this will look like from a joint perspective. So I can't set that out this afternoon, but I'll give you a couple of tips from industry, all of what we see as vitally important. It's about building a framework of anticipation of change, sectoral and regional roadmaps, ensuring that through sustainable industrial policies, we're creating quality jobs in Europe. We know through industry studies that there is a huge potential for job creation with the transformation of our gas sector. Some industry studies suggest that there could be anything from 600,000 to 850,000 additional direct jobs created, with 1.1 to 1.5 million indirect jobs by 2050. These are large, substantial job creation numbers. We want to make sure that those jobs are created in Europe. That means having a jobs agenda linked to a hydrogen strategy. It means having a jobs agenda linked to a renewable gas strategy. And we know that in terms of biogas, actually, it's really interesting. It was actually mentioned by one of the previous speakers, I think Frans Timmermans, that there's a natural link to local jobs because of the connection to the agricultural sector and to our waste industries. When it comes to European industrial leadership in clean gas, we see a mixed picture at the moment in terms of hydrogen. We see things picking up on the demand side. We know every week we have a new announcement from the steel industry, from the rail supply industry, aerospace or road transport. But on the supply side, the manufacturing of equipment is really a big question for us. We want to make sure that that equipment manufacturing really is in Europe and that we capturing the leadership there, not losing the leadership by losing our vital industrial assets. Finally, in terms of the workforce, we need a plan around labour transitions. This is going to mean a big shift in terms of skills, in terms of training, reskilling and upskilling, and this needs a coordinated plan to put in place. The social partners, we, Eurogas and our members at national level have a clear role to play, as do unions and companies in negotiation with each other. But we need a strong public engagement from government at regional, at national and at European level to ensure that this is a fair transition. There will be workers who are negatively affected, and social protection systems will have to catch people who fall through the gaps of the transition towards a decarbonised economy. And in order for the whole system to bring the social acceptance, which we heard Jens talk about, we heard Frans Timmermans talk about, we need to have full worker participation at every stage in the process. This is a societal transformation. It can't be just left to business. It has to be a social dialogue in its broadest sense to ensure that fundamentally we are climate leaders on technology, and we show the world that that addressing the technological challenge of climate change does not bring a social cost, but we can bring people with us and we can show social leadership globally. Thanks very much, Sasha.
Judith, thank you very much. Thank you. Some really interesting points there. Judith, thank you. Now, I'm very aware that you will be leaving us shortly. So actually, if I may, I'll ask a direct question to you. And I'd like the panel maybe to chip in on the answer to this one, because you've mentioned politicians as needing to play a part in this just transition, which you've mentioned several times. But you have members of the industry on this same panel, Judith. What would you say to the industry? Is the industry looking after jobs and the transition of jobs and the skills of the workers? Are they doing enough? And what more from the industry would you like to see? And then I'll give an opportunity to our other panelists to maybe answer you. Judith.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to give a blanket statement when there is such different experience across the industry. But what we would plead for would be that there be constructive industrial relations through this transition, that we work together on the transition, and that we ensure that that there aren't situations where communities and workforces are left hanging, I would say. And unfortunately, I gave the example of the energy equipment manufacturing sector. That's one area where we see that restructuring processes are not being done in a responsible and a socially engaged manner. And it's unfortunate for us because we see the job potential of this transition. And what our fear is that those jobs will be created elsewhere in the world at the same time that we see structural changes in our economies. So we really plead with industry that they engage in a responsible manner and in full consultation with their workforces to guarantee that we can deliver just transition concretely on the ground. But I wouldn't like to name and shame here. And equally, I think it wouldn't be so fair to pick out individual companies. I would say that at European level, we consider Eurogas an important partner in building that framework at European level. And we're really looking forward to this joint project, which we're about to embark on.
Okay, Judith, thank you very much. Dieter or Helga, do either of you would like to come in on that one? Let's bring you in, Helga, on that one.
So perhaps representing an individual business as I work in Equinor, I agree with you that you can't let business and expect business to solve this alone. But I do think we have to have frameworks, which means that you get business alongside how you want to find a solution. I'll come to in my introduction shortly. A few things that we're working, which we actually think is going to be able to maintain industrial advantages also in Europe if we get it right. So they're very much in accordance with a lot you said.
It's a lot of people having to work together and bring everyone together on this one. Dieter, did you want to come in on this as well?
Yes, thank you very much, Sasha. It's very important for us. I mean, we're preparing, if I look at our automotive sector, we prepare for the transformation already for years. So our goal is always to have a social transformation, to have a just transformation, and every employee counts. So we invest actually a lot in our employees, in reskilling, in education. We try to motivate employees who work now, for example, for diesel to move to stationary fuel cells or to fuel cell development. So this is reality in the companies in Europe. And for us, really, every employee counts. And that's why, I can just underline what the speaker just said before.
Absolutely. And I hope that the pair of you don't feel that we've unfairly picked on you for this one. It obviously is something that is a question to the industry, and that you are possibly the best place to answer it. Judith, I know you now have to leave us, but thank you very much for your time and giving us your opinions and your thoughts this afternoon. So Judith Curtin-Darling from Industrial in Europe. Thank you. Let us continue with our panel and with our opening thoughts on the theme of can the EU capitalise on its clean gas tech leadership? Helga, let me come back to you then for this one. Senior Vice President for Gas and Power at Equinor, with your opening statement.
Thank you, Sasha. Good afternoon, and I in particular look forward to the questions and the panel debate that we'll have in just a little while. And my introduction will build on some beliefs which I hope is not seen as too controversial. First of all, Europe will need both clean electrons and clean molecules to be able to deliver on the emission targets. Secondly, hydrogen will be key to decarbonize the sectors that cannot easily be electrified, and several have already talked about that. And hydrogen will also actually have to be used to generate power in the times where the renewables is not able to meet what we would call peak demand. And thirdly, hydrogen will therefore be needed at scale, and substantial carbon capture and storage will then be necessary to enable blue hydrogen for the future. And lastly, in terms of beliefs, and surprisingly maybe even seen as the most controversial one, I guess, we believe that the issue at hand is too big to be picky about what technology looks like. It's the reduction of the greenhouse gases and the sustainable development goals that should guide us, and not our individual favorite technologies. So we strongly believe in this technology neutrality in terms of how we get to the zero. So from beliefs to a little bit what we're doing. So in Equinor, our ambition is that we will play a leading role in this energy transition. Historically, and as some of you will probably know, we have exported gas to Europe now for more than 40 years, and we currently market around a quarter of Europe's total gas consumption. And as such, we're proud in terms of that we have helped Europe reduce its carbon footprint, where gas has been used instead of coal. And we have also already captured and stored significant amount of CO2 already. One example, that's from our Sleipner field, where we have stored more than 26 million tons of CO2. And we've been doing so for a quarter of a century. So we know how to do that. And now we are expanding and growing our renewables portfolio. We have access to two of the largest wind projects in the world. That would be the Dogger Bank in the UK, Empire Wind outside New York. And we're also a partner, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in large industrial decarbonization initiatives, both in Germany and in UK, where we are working towards blue hydrogen, and we're doing that, of course, together with the industry. So two concrete examples to illustrate these low-carbon projects. So one is H Tomorrow Steel, where we're working with ThyssenKrupp and Open Grid Europe to take gas then from Norway, decarbonize it, and then ship the CO2 back to Norway for storage. The potential on this one alone is around 11 million tons per year of reduced CO2 emissions. Second example, UK government have announced they will now co-fund several of our projects working to decarbonize the largest industrial clusters in the UK. This would be Zero Carbon Humber and the Net Zero Teesside project. And in this way, we believe that we can prepare the UK industry for the future and then protect the jobs and the industrial value creation while also being part of the energy transition. And this is not just to prove the point that we're technology agnostic, but we have also joined Europe's largest green hydrogen project, which is the North H2 in the Netherlands. And last but not least, we're backed by the Norwegian government. We are building out the Northern Lights together with Shell and Total. And this will be a very large carbon capture and storage facility, which will initially have the ability to transport and store more than 1.5 million tons per year of CO2, but it can easily be expanded further to 5 million tons per year in the second phase. So, and we see huge interest across Europe and also across industries, and are in dialogue with more than 50 businesses that have been seeking to use the Northern Light for storage of CO2. So I believe ourselves and others in the industry are actually doing our best to help with the energy transition towards the net zero. But we still need to also provide reliable and affordable energy while doing that. And then there are several things that worries me going forward. And that list could be very long, but I'm going to take 3 points here at the end. One, and the first one, is openness. I think we have to acknowledge and speak open and much more candid about the cost of the energy transition. The popular opinion is starting and will see that the transition does not come for free. Politicians, regulators, industry, we need to be open around these costs and not obfuscate the debate and make it more complicated than it already is. Because we will have to accept and increase costs, no matter if it's supported in the form of a carbon price, a subsidy, or whatever other levy we choose in the end. Second worry is pragmatism. And this is in terms of we have to avoid letting perfect be the enemy of the good. It will be impossible to build out green hydrogen with the speed and the scale where it can truly become the solution. And this is back to my point around technology neutrality. Blue is not going to be the enemy of green. They will actually work better together. And then my third and last worry in this context, commerciality. We need to create that demand for that clean product, and then the cost of carbon needs to be transferred to the product so that the industry and the consumer as well is incentivized to do the right thing. And then you need a transparent and technology neutral carbon pricing. That would probably be the most easy way of accomplishing this. But then we would also believe that demand-side subsidies are likely needed to sort of kick off and get the right momentum around this. So to conclude on an ending statement, I'm confident that molecules should and will have a big role to play in this transition alongside the electrons. And there is no contradiction in believing in a good future for natural gas and the energy transition. I believe it's likely more a prerequisite to believe in both. And thank you, and I look forward to your questions and defend some of my points further in that.
Aga, thank you very much for your opening statement. And so just to be clear, to go back on something that you said, you said you see a place for both blue and green hydrogen.
Yes, most certainly. And there are many reasons why I would say that. The first argument that typically comes up when you're talking about blue versus green is around the economics. And I think that is a good argument, but it is not going to be my first. But then if you look at the economics, we can do blue hydrogen. It will still be, talking about being candid about the cost, it will still cost twice as much as just burning gas. But if we look on blue, we're able to create hydrogen for maybe $1 to $2 per kilo. If you do it through green hydrogen, you're probably looking at 3-4 times that currently. And then there's a lot of projections, of course, that shows that green is going to be cheaper and cheaper, and we also believe in that. But it will take a significant amount of time. But my main argument is that even if you say cost doesn't matter, let's just do it. We just have to do it in a green way. You simply won't be able to do it. If you look at the Dogger Bank project, biggest wind project in the world right now, I think. If we dedicated the entire Dogger Bank wind project all to green hydrogen, it would be the equivalent of a little bit more than 1 BCM of natural gas. If we look at the North H2, which we ambition is that this will be massive in 2040, that massiveness that equates to around 3.3 BCM of gas. We have fields that produce more than 10 times that. So even these what we call big projects, unfortunately, won't be enough. So we need all the green we can get. But then we need blue alongside to get the scale and the speed in it. And eventually, hopefully, it will all be green.
Okay. Thank you very much. And incidentally, if you have questions along those lines, more questions, do type them into the Q&A box. We'll try and get through as many as possible. We'll concentrate on the opening statements at the moment. Dieter Schramm from Bosch, let me come back to you now and give me your overview of how the EU can capitalise on its clean gas tech leadership.
Yes, thank you very much. So the question is, can we capitalize on the climate neutrality? And we say yes. So we say a successful move to climate neutrality, to a climate neutral economy, to a hydrogen economy is important for Europe. For Europe's technology leadership as much as it is for us as a company, as Bosch. And here I would just like to underline that we ourselves are climate neutral since 2020 worldwide in all our factories. We're not stopping there. So we also submitted ourselves to Scope 3, so to the upstream and downstream stages of the value chain. So we would like to cut emissions there also by 15% by 2030. So we take the Green Deal and the Paris goal quite serious. We believe climate neutrality requires timely and massive emission cuts in every sector. So this is why we have to be open for all available technologies in all sectors. So fuel cells, hydrogen for combustion engines, heat pumps, hydrogen-ready boilers, combined heat and power applications to bring down emissions as quickly as possible. As a technology leader, we can say Bosch is H2 ready in all sectors. So in mobility, in industry, and in heating. We believe renewable gas, for example, hydrogen is a very strong enabler for sectoral integration. We also see that blending of hydrogen is key to kickstart the hydrogen economy. And we would like to underline that electrification on one side is the way to go to achieve the Green Deal goals. And next to it is defossilization. So also hydrogen, renewable gases have their way in this. So the combination of electrification and hydrogen we see is the answer to achieve our goals in all sectors. This should translate into regulation and also research innovation. So the IPCI, for example, on hydrogen is very important. And I think a lot of companies here also in this room are highly engaged in this. And for regulation, as it was named before, there should be discussions on the ETS for the different sectors. Where do we go there, as Mr. Timmermans said? And then also the Renewables Energy Directive, this is CO2 regulation for cars. We believe it's not one regulation, it's a lot regulation where we have to actually open the path for this. And this is where I would like to stop because I know we're running out of time. So the message here is, as a technology leader in Europe, and I speak for many companies, we are ready. We invest a lot in these technologies, and we are ready for scaling up. And to stop here, green hydrogen is the way to go. And I think we have to discuss then also on the import strategy, because we know we cannot produce all the renewable energy we need for this in Europe alone. Thank you.
Deirdre, thank you very much. And before we bring in Annegret for her opening statement, you said at the end, and I think you said it 3 times, we are ready. And it almost made it sound like you are ready, but you're waiting for something. And there's something that sort of almost that is stopping the speed that you want to go at. And I wonder what you see as being the greatest challenge to you being ready, but being able to put those plans into fruition.
Yeah, I think it's the combination of the availability of the renewable energy. I think that's what we all agree. So then also the infrastructure we need for that. And then really the regulatory signal to give this last final push, because as we said, and as Helge said, we also have to be transparent. It's quite costly to do this. And here, these research and innovation projects like IPCI, they are the tools that the EU has, and we should use them. So it's basically to give the signal, the industry is ready. We can go out of our laboratories and go on the streets because we have those products, and they will come now into the market. So in heating and buildings and also in the mobility sector.
Okay, you are ready to move out of the laboratory.
Yes.
All right. Deirdre, thank you very much. Well, let's look at the regulations then. Joining us from CEER, the Council of European Energy Regulators, Annegret Grobel. Annegret, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. And I'm happy to hear that someone is waiting for the regulator to come in. So be assured we are ready, and we indeed have already replied also to the Commission's impact assessment, and just recently also published our new strategy, CR strategy, for energy transition for the consumer, and that is what we focus around. And maybe I say a few words on this and on the general concept behind that we as energy regulators see ourselves as a promoter of the energy regulation for the consumer. We put the consumer really at the center, and I think it was already in the discussion also from Mr. Timmermans and others to the importance of having a just transition, of leaving no one behind, and that of course is particularly also true for the consumers, given that and we realize this that this is costly, and that the costs are likely to be unevenly distributed. So we have to find ways to cope with this in a cost-effective way. So we as regulators think that it is important to give incentives and to have what we call dynamic regulation, where we see it is important to achieve the energy system integration by providing incentives in a technological neutral way. We fully agree with this, and this implies to revisit probably some of the definitions in the clean energy package to make this compatible with the upcoming gas package or gas and decarbonization package, in order to ensure that these two frameworks are consistent. One of this part is that we ensure that especially the provisions regarding the consumer are mirrored, so to speak, in the gas package. The other thing that we think is important with regard to the networks and is an integrated planning of both electricity and gas, and I very much agree. We need both. We need renewables, what you called green electrons and green molecules. So no doubt about this. However, from the point of view as a regulator for the regulation of the underlying infrastructure, this needs then to have an integrated planning more than now, so that the infrastructure is also fit for the new business models, for what you all outlined in terms of new projects, new technology. This should not be hindered or restrained by regulation. So we are aware that we need there also sometimes of regulatory sandboxes, or we also outlined in one of our white papers that for hydrogen, we think it might be good to first see how the market develops, and in particular also not to impose regulation on every hydrogen line that is there for business purposes, but to define criteria when regulation should kick in, so that we have a good timing there. And of course, naturally, when the network develops and turns into a natural monopoly, this is the latest moment where it has to kick in, and where then also the principles that we have now must then also be applied. So third-party access and of course incentive regulation on the network tariff side for a cost reflective. I agree that there are costs, but of course as a regulator I want that it is done all in a cost-effective way. So that is for us of course also important, and we see that there are certain regulatory tools that can achieve this. But of course, it is important to have this dynamic approach in the sense of finding the right timing when it is needed, and to also have the right level of intervention there. And most important, as I said, to include all players. So on the energy side, operators, on the electricity and gas side, the operators, hydrogen, if this is separate, and also, as I said, the consumer. So we see that there's a huge potential for the consumer in this, to buy in this new framework or in this new system, and by this benefit from it. So it's, as Mr. Timmermans said, I was very impressed by this. It's not only a moral obligation, it is economically driven to take everyone on board. And it is the best way then for the consumers to also benefit from the energy transition in a fair way. And I think that is what we need to see as a regulator. That the regulator has more responsibilities than in the earlier time. The system gets more complex, no doubt about it. So that means we have to implement various regulatory dimensions in a balanced way, so that we give the right framework for innovation and for investments to happen rather than standing in the way. But I also should be clear that we think that the framework contains certain basic principles that do not change from now with regard to the regulation of natural monopolies, as I outlined already. And that includes also unbundling. When a service or a product or an activity is considered to be able to be provided for by competition in the market. So in that case, we clearly advocate that electrolyzers, etc., should not be owned by operators, but that should otherwise you will not get a level playing field. And we believe that the market is the one that should choose the most effective technology. It's not the regulator, but the regulator's role is to ensure that the framework is in place and that the incentives are set right for all players, and to have a clear definition ex ante of the roles of each player, of the rights and obligations, and also to ensure predictability in this place. I think I leave it at this, and happy to engage more in the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Annegret, thank you very much. Deirdre and Hege, I was watching you both while Annegret was speaking, and there was a certain amount of nodding. There was a certain amount of concentration, and then some very thoughtful looks. Hege, you were at one stage nodding. I believe it looked like in agreement. I mean, what do you want to bounce back to Annegret on this one?
I think where I was thinking most in terms of, the regulator shouldn't decide on the technology, you said, and then my fear was thinking, okay, but then we end up with the politicians deciding which technology is best, and they might not be in the best place either. So that's again one of my main point that I try to argue, this technology neutrality, because this is going to be expensive, and it is going to hit people no matter how you do it, and then we need to work with trying to get that distribution as fair as possible, etc. But let's not make it even more costly than it has to do. And there will be plenty of green, no matter how we decide to do the gas in terms of blue. But we have to do this in a sensible way. That's my biggest fear. But okay. I think that was the point where I was looking most thoughtful.
Okay, Deirdre, let's bring you back in on this one. Hege's talking a lot about cost. I think actually he labelled cost as one of his worries. Is that a worry for you? Would you categorise that as such?
I would say it's part of the mix. So cost is one part. For us, what worries us the most is the discussion that we see now, that we have a discussion on who's getting hydrogen. So which sector first? And we should not start there. So we should not start talking about industry should get it first, and then mobility, and then heating. We should rather think that we should, that's what I said before, engage in trying to scale up, that we have enough renewable energy to scale up hydrogen in all sectors, because we need it in all sectors to cut down emission and to be neutral in the end. So that's, at the moment, our biggest worry that we see in the policy debate, that we have this discussion who should get which hydrogen first. Yeah, and I was, just to finish, I was nodding to Annegret when she said we should put the consumer in the focus. That's sometimes what we forget. That's where I nodded. I really like that approach, because in the end, if we look at ourselves, it's the energy that we want to have in our houses that should be safe, clean, and affordable. That was the point where I nodded. Thank you.
I think it's a very good point to remember, actually, when we always have these discussions, we can talk about the consumer in an abstract form, but actually everybody on this panel is also a consumer as well. And it does take you back to what Frans Timmermans said earlier about wanting to make that the challenge of getting there for children and for grandchildren and for everyone now as a consumer. So consumers now and consumers in the future. Let's take some questions. There's questions for all panelists. I think we will start with, there's been a lot of questions actually about CCS, carbon capture and storage. So Hege, let me come to you on this one. Maybe you can tell us more about Northern Lights as well on this one. A couple of questions asking how safe it is and what is the real cost, including the storage costs and the safety as well. So Hege, do you want to take us through your particular project?
Good question. When I compared blue and green hydrogen, that was then of course blue inclusive of all the costs of the value chain towards storing it. You know, you can't talk about blue without taking in all of that cost, and it's with all of that cost that the blue will only cost you twice as much as gas, which is significantly cheaper than green. So that's on the cost side. In terms of safety, I would then assume it's the safety around whether it's kept in the ground and not the safety of the operation as such. And in terms of being kept in the ground, if I use the Sleipner example, we have then injected CO2 in the Sleipner reservoir for 25 years. And it's not that we inject it, even though it's 2,500 meters under the subsurface, but it's not like we inject it and hope it stays there. What we then do is that we have seismic on it, 4D seismic, we can see how it evolves and we can see how it goes. We even get this approved by the government, you know, so they inspect it and see everything is okay, because we get a reduction on our carbon tax because of it. So this is something that we're very comfortable with. Another thing which is good with CCS is that it's very, very quickly scalable if we want to do more of it. We drill several hundred wells a year. If we wanted to, we could do many of these projects very, very quickly. So if we want to do more of it, it's just about, you know, how much do we want, and is this something that regulation, subsidies and support schemes will support or not? I think that was the key point.
Do you feel though that maybe at the moment just too much store is set by CCS, and a lot of people are saying, oh, but we have this possibility, this potential. Do you think there's almost too much relying on it?
I don't really see that as a very controversial technology. You know, it's not something new. There's a lot of CCS going on in the US as well, and I do see concerns in terms of, you know, not in my backyard type of thing. You don't want you know, a huge CO2 storage facility, perhaps land, but you have many options there. So yes, I do think you can rely on CCS if we want to, but then again, it's what sort of mechanisms do we drive? Again, blue hydrogen is twice as expensive as just burning the gas, but we cannot just burn the gas, so we need to choose something else. And then I think blue hydrogen is at least one both technologically possible way, and it's not going to be that expensive.
Okay. Annegret, let me bring you in on this one. A question for you on hydrogen storage. Quite simply, what is the view of the CER on the role of hydrogen storage, Annegret?
We haven't particularly looked at hydrogen storage, but we of course see the importance of storage to stabilize the system as a whole. So and both on the electricity side, using batteries, for example, also looking at the effect that electric vehicles can provide flexibility to the system, so that they are not only seen as charging, as a requiring energy, but that there's also the possibility that they provide energy as a battery. So that I know that there are very different estimations on how big this effect is and at which time of the year, etc. But we think that at least we should consider those in both directions. Yeah, so that's one thing, and of course, other storage on the electricity side being built up as an alternative to curtailing renewables, etc. So we see that there will be an efficiency gain, and last but not least, of course, you can say that a certain way gas to power or power to gas can be considered in regulatory terms as a sort of storage, and so we see that all this is an important element to bridge the let's say, or to compensate or to neutralize the volatility of renewables. So it's an element that is a necessary addition to increase of renewables.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very aware of the time constraints that we have, but I'm just going to try and squeeze one more in here now to Hege and to Dieter. Do you really believe that hydrogen will be scalable and economically feasible in the next 10 years? 10 years is the time scale that this questioner has put on it. Dieter, do you believe it will be?
Yes. So, for example, if we take stationary fuel cells, we're preparing the full-scale production by 2024. And those stationary fuel cells you can use, they can provide homes, cities, factories, data centers, electric vehicle charging infrastructures, hospital with electricity and heat. So, and they're flexible to run on biogas, natural gas, hydrogen mixtures. So my answer would be 2024 for that. And then after that comes the mobile applications that you can see for the mobile fuel cell stacks that you would use for trucks, because trucks need to be electrified as well in order to pay into achieving the goals, and fuel cells are one of the solutions there, and they will also come into the market after that. So our answer, yes.
Okay.
But if I could, on the production side, I think it will be extremely challenging. If you rely only on green, I think it's going to be impossible. You know, Europe today consumes almost 500 BCM, if I use that as the energy equivalent. What we're talking about on that big North 2, what we might be able to do by 2027 is 1 gigawatt. That is, as you know, the biggest. That's the biggest we're looking at. That is the equivalent of, I think it's something like 0.3 BCM. And we can do that until 2027. So the scale of it, there will be a lot, but the scale of it, you have to compare to the total energy consumption of Europe. And then we have a tremendous challenge. And then, if I can conclude, back to my technology neutrality point, we therefore need everything to push in the same direction.
Okay, thank you. We are out of time, but I just want to leave our audience with a final thought from all of you. And I would ask you all just to, in one sentence, if you could, please. But obviously, the years of 2020 and 2021 have been very dominated for many of us with the global pandemic. I would like you all to tell me in one sentence, what do you hope we will be talking about in a year from now? So looking, I assume, on an industrial level within your own organization or your own sphere. So in one sentence, please, what you hope we will be talking about this time next year. Annegret, would you like to go first?
Yes, I hope that we are talking then about the new proposal from the Commission on the gas and decarbonization package.
Okay, thank you very much. Dieter?
I hope that we talk about the Green Deal and the revision for the CO2 for cars, and that renewable fuels are part of that and not electrification only.
Okay, and Hege?
I would hope that we again actually can travel and see each other. I guess that was the first thing that came to mind. But then in terms of this, I hope we're beyond looking at everyone on each other's turf, that we see this as a big challenge where we basically need everything to work together, and we talk about how to answer that question you have, how to get far already to 2030.
Okay, so I think I'm sure all panelists would agree that to be in the same physical room and to all address all these concerns and challenges together would be, well, for a start, a very good position to be in. Let's all hope for that. My huge thanks to our panelists on our first panel this afternoon, Judith Curtin-Darling, who joined us at the beginning, Annegret Grobel, Helga Hagen and Dieter Schramm. Thank you all very much for joining us. Much appreciate your time this afternoon. And thank you very much for your questions and your participation as well. We're going to take a very short break now, a 5-minute break. And then we'll be back for our second panel, looking at decarbonisation of buildings, what has happened, and indeed the challenges looking ahead. What can be done? What can be achieved? What is there still to do? So I will leave you for the next 5 minutes. Grab yourselves a quick cup of tea, but in the meantime, enjoy this video film from Eurogas. Thank you.
Basketball. Definitely basketball.
It would be sailing.
I think it would be a decathlon.
In my opinion, it would be cycling.
I think we could compare it with the triathlon.
It would be certainly something multidisciplinary, just like a triathlon.
My team here at the BRD think triathlon.
I will say football.
It would track and field competition.
I think it would be curling.
Energy transition were a sport, it'd probably be a marathon, right?
In many ways, the Tour de France is the more apt analogy.
We will be facing quite a long challenge for some years in the future. And I think also we could identify different phases in such a competition.
The countries will have to excel at all three disciplines: decentralization, digitalization, and decarbonization. As one without the other two doesn't mean much.
In the race, you're on your own, but you have a team of people who take care of you and your equipment.
You need a strong team with different skills and different techniques that work together to get a straight line as possible to the goal.
It runs on human energy. You could call that renewable.
Every day, a group of athletes will have to get up and for 20 to 30 some stages, brave the elements with great athletic accomplishment to eventually achieve the target, eventually cross the finish line.
Seeing so many people and so many organizations gathering together and working in different pathways, different solutions, different technologies, but with the same destination target on the mind.
Now, let's do not forget about the huge amount of efforts and hard work that it takes for such glory.
In terms of physical demands, both energy transition and long-distance track races require pacing, stamina, and tactics.
Right, they both require steady, consistent effort, resilience, and a kind of clarity of purpose.
You need dedication and a lot of training.
Sustainable strategies and also a strong speed endurance.
The entry level to cycling is very low. Everybody can start to cycle. So even if you don't think you're fit, you could start, you could pick it up quickly.
And both of them at a certain point get difficult and require a kind of courage that we might not always feel we have.
It needs the trained and experienced sailor who knows how to steer his boat against headwinds, against currents, and reach the goal, which in our case would be the decarbonized energy future.
The energy transition is well underway. We're out there running, but there are still many hurdles we'll need to overcome.
The developed world will lead energy transition, but their medals will not be worth much unless they share their experience and resources with the developing countries. Is humanity fit enough for this triathlon? The answer is a resounding yes.
Whether humanity is fit for the challenge? Yes, definitely.
Absolutely, humanity is fit for winning this race, and we have shown this during our collaboration in the vaccine development faced by the pandemic crisis.
At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which country wins, as long as each does its part to deliver carbon savings.
We have to start now. We have all the solutions available.
In the end, as important as it often is for us who won the race, which nation has captured the jersey, more importantly, is that we collectively crossed the finish line and maybe we've had some nice views on the way.
And afterwards, you get ice cream and a nap. I don't know if that last part applies to both.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back if you've just grabbed yourselves a cup of tea, or indeed maybe you were watching the video thinking I really must get out and enjoy the sunshine, or indeed whatever the weather is like where you are, and get back on the bike. Is it a sport? Well, I don't know whether you get ice cream at the end, but we're certainly going to have a great panel this afternoon. We're going to talk about the decarbonisation of buildings, what has been done so far, the different methods, the different possibilities, and dare I say it, the best challenges that are still to be overcome or are indeed being overcome by the industry so far. Now, as we did in our first panel, the floor is open to you to ask questions. I will try and get through as many as possible. It doesn't have to be a question. It could possibly just be a comment, or maybe you want to hear more from a certain panelist about their particular area of expertise. Feel free to chip in. Sadly, obviously, I can't run around a room with a microphone at the moment to get your views, but I will try and make sure your opinions are heard as much as possible. So let me crack on with the second panel this afternoon and introduce the next four. And if you wouldn't mind raising your hand in case you're not immediately known to our audience today. First of all, we have Gabriel Sousa, the CEO of Eurogas Natural Distribution in Portugal. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Thomas Nowak, the Secretary General at the EHPA, the European Heat Pump Association. Thomas, thank you for joining us. Federica Sabati, the Secretary General of the EHI, the European Heating Industry, representing today 90% of the heating market and 70% of the EU heat pump market. And then also joining us, Monique Goyens, who is the Director General from the BEUC, the European Consumer Organisation. So, thank you very much for joining us. And as we did in the first panel, Eurogas has suggested that each of you give us an opening statement, giving us your opinion and your thoughts on the decarbonisation of buildings. So, Gabriel, may I come to you first?
Thank you very much. And hello to you all. Unfortunately, we cannot be physically with each other, but just a brief introduction. At Eurogas Natural Distribution, or at GGND, we are operating 9 gas DSOs in Portugal, representing around 70% of the gas distribution market. So operating 13,000 kilometers of network for 1.1 million customers and delivering 18.5 terawatt hours of natural gas for the moment. So we will be applying all the efforts precisely that this natural gas in the future will be supplying renewable gases. And addressing our panel topic, well, the situation that we have in Portugal is pretty positive to address this goal. We operate a quite recent modern infrastructure. We have natural gas in Portugal since 1997, so we began quite recently. The average age of our network is around 15 euros, mainly built in polyethylene. More than 95% is already built in polyethylene. So this gives us a positive position to address injecting and managing the gas grid with renewable gases. On the other side, also looking for what we have in Portuguese as a positive context, as you might know, recently, in the last 2 years, the solar photovoltaic auctions launched by the Portuguese government, well, they arrived with an output of cost very, very competitive. In 19, around 14 euros per megawatt hour, and in 20, 11 euros. And this creates precisely what I would say a very positive context to consider the generation of hydrogen and also receiving hydrogen as renewable gas into the gas network. And so we are fully committed in our organization. It's one of our top strategic topics to decarbonize the gas infrastructure. It will be relevant to supply gas for industries that are not so easy to transform for electricity. But since we are managing a gas network that goes for the industries, but also goes through the cities and through all the other buildings, we are talking about an asset that has a value of around 2.6 billion euros. So doing the write-off of such an asset will be quite critical. And so in this way, we are looking for all the efforts, and with some pilot projects that I will have the pleasure to talk later on. But we are doing all the efforts precisely to operate in the future an asset with renewable gases, so that we can think about renewable energy, not only on renewable power, electricity, but also renewable gases.
Gabriel, thank you very much. Thank you for giving us an idea of the situation in Portugal. So, to be absolutely clear, you're saying that your infrastructure is relatively modern, and so you've been able to capitalise on that. Is that what you're suggesting you are working from as a base point?
Yes, precisely. So we are getting together two positive issues. The network is very recent, so having more than 95% of polyethylene gives us a positive context, and we are precisely this year beginning the first pilot project of receiving hydrogen at the moment on a blend. We will have a project for the next 2 years, beginning with 5% and then increasing until 20%. It's a small project where we will have this distribution for a small network that we isolated with 80 residential customers, one industrial quite big customer, and other commercial entities. It's also relevant because in this project we will be addressing the participation of several stakeholders, which I think we also touched a little bit on the previous panel, but we will have the participation of very relevant engineering and technological companies in Portugal. Also, the gas manufacturer appliances. We have in Portugal a company owned by Bosch, Vulcano, based in Portugal, and they have also an innovation center for the water heating equipments, and also other entities for the certification of the gas appliances. So it's also to bring together all these stakeholders to develop knowledge, to develop skills, to develop training programs, and so that we have a cluster in our economy ready for the challenges that we are facing. And as mentioned already in other situations, it's urgent. We need to move fast because, well, of course, to get until 2050, I would say that this first decade will be very relevant to do these first pilot projects, but already to prepare the challenging position with operating 100% renewable gases on the infrastructure.
Just briefly, before we turn to our other panelists, so that the audience is clear, you're talking about this as a pilot project with just 5% at the moment, but heading up to 20%. Can you give us an idea of the timescale of when you would like to either increase this to more than a pilot project, or indeed increase to 20%?
No, in fact, things are going very fast. All these challenges from the European Commission and also the way they are applied in each country. So for the moment, we designed this first pilot project, but it's fair to say that there is already a relevant pipeline of projects coming on. In Portugal, we are now going with the POSEUR program, which is a financing program precisely for having renewable gases producers injecting on the network. And we have currently already something like 14, 15 projects that are contacting our company precisely to inject either hydrogen, but also biomethane. So the urgency is precisely that this first pilot project is very relevant for us to take the ends in the topic. So checking all the operation, and in fact, we will begin, we expect to begin in June, the first injection, as I mentioned, beginning with around 2% and increasing until the end of 2 years for 20%. Nevertheless, between the producer of hydrogen and the blending point, we will operate a network with 1.4 kilometers of 100% hydrogen from the producer to the blending point. So it's a relevant challenge. We are very happy to do it, and we need to do it fast, but also on a safe way to get all the other projects that are coming on the pipeline.
Indeed, Gabriel, thank you very much. Let's bring in Thomas now. Thomas Nowak from the EHPA. Thomas, do you want to give us your outline on the situation with the decarbonisation of buildings? Where do you stand and what are your views for the future?
Yeah, thank you very much. As I've said in this small video, what I think is time is of essence. We have to start pretty much immediately. And we are in a situation, it was repeatedly stated by Timmermans and others, that we are still using 75% of fossil fuels to heat buildings. If you compare that to heat pumps, we are seeing last year 1.6 million heat pumps that were sold, 1.4 million for heating, about 200,000 for hot water. One of the main providers is actually the Bosch facility that the colleague was mentioning, Gabriel. We have a total stock of 14.6 million heat pumps. That's about 10% of all European buildings. So it's a very solid base to elaborate on. They bring a significant contribution. I think the fastest way to decarbonize a building is today with a heat pump, because even in a renovation case, you can save 50% and more. If electricity is further decarbonized, we go to 80, 90%. So actually, what we're doing here with more heat pumps would be a readiness for a complete decarbonization of heating and cooling. And let's not forget 3 to 4 terawatt hours of demand side flexibility that we also have here. So that's important for the system integration strategy. What I would like to reiterate is Timmermans said, let's electrify as much as possible. And because heat pumps are the best solution that we have today, the most energy efficient one and the available one, we should use them more and push them wherever possible. And then there is probably a need for other solutions, but this amount will be smaller. Are we ready? If you look at today's technology development, while we speak here, the ISH is happening, the biggest European trade fair for heating technologies is happening, and nearly every manufacturer is providing now new solutions that are ready, that you can buy them from this week, next week, for the direct replacement of an existing boiler with a heat pump. They provide you with 70 degrees or even more, so they are capable of being replaced in an existing building without doing a lot of renovation. Maybe you have to replace a radiator or two, but that is absolutely feasible, and they can be deployed today. Let's also not forget that this is local employment. Heat pumps are, you could say that's a disadvantage, a bit more labor intensive than traditional boilers. So we will employ more people for a considerable amount of time. We will also use local energy because electricity we have here, the gas supplies of Europe, they're a bit limited. So I'm not saying there is no role for gas in heating. I'm just saying that we have very good solutions for the direct replacement in residential buildings and elsewhere in industry, and we should use them to the maximum. What is needed from a policy perspective? We have heard a CO2 price or an internalization of external effects that we think is super important. A CO2 price would help a lot. Something in a direction of 70, 80, 90 euros per ton of CO2 that would really shift the market, the demand side perspective. And then, of course, it's still a bit of a nuisance that fossil fuels are subsidized in some legislations of Europe, but I'm hearing that European governments are moving to making that no longer possible. Yeah, I think we have a good solution, and I'm more optimistic. I think it's possible. We can decarbonize. The energy system integration strategy foresees 40% of all residential buildings to be heated with electricity, and if energy efficiency first prevails, that will be heated with heat pumps by 2030, 65% of commercial buildings. So we have a huge market opportunity ahead of us. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you very much. You finished with the percentages there, the 45%, I think you said it was 40 or 45% residential.
40 and 65, yeah.
And 65 commercial. I'm very interested on where the consumer plays into this and the cost to the consumer. And I don't necessarily mean where it's priced in the market. I mean, where you have residential properties where people are renting, for instance, they don't own the property, or they're not intending on staying in an area for a long amount of time. It is an outlay for the future. And I wonder how you have factored that into it. And if that is why we see the discrepancy in the percentages of taking up within industry or commercial property as opposed to residential.
Yeah, that's a very important point. I'm sure Monique will also touch upon that, because in the end, it's a question of affordability. What we see at the moment is that a fossil boiler is often cheaper, but it's cheaper to the individual, and society generously pays for the extra costs. So I think if we take a total cost of ownership, we have to consider that. And then we have to ask ourselves, why is the energy system created in a way that makes it cheaper to pollute the environment and makes it more expensive to save? So if I'm encouraged by Mr. Timmermans, Vice President Timmermans and his colleagues to act in favor of an energy efficient society, then I should actually benefit also economically. So I see a strong obligation for the policymakers to shape the energy price system correctly. And then to your point, I think we have abundant amounts of money available in Europe, 1.8 trillion euros in the recovery plans. If we use this amount of money to renovate Europe's building stock, we create employment, we create more comfortable buildings. And that's something sometimes that's forgotten when people say, well, let's not renovate the building, let's just replace the boiler. If you do that, you also leave the people with an inefficient building. So in case ever this energy fuel becomes more expensive, and we have heard that blue hydrogen is 2 times more expensive, green hydrogen 4 times more expensive than today's gas. So if you say we just replace the heating technology, you actually leave the people with higher heating costs. And if we put this together, if we factor this into total cost of ownership and put together a package where a consultant visits your building, gives you an advice on what to do, recommends an installer and provides you with a financing package, I think then this financing problem is disappearing.
Okay, so you're very sure that you have the finances and that you would have the consumers on board for that one. Monique, I will come to you obviously for your thoughts and your opinions on that one. But actually, I'd like to go to Federica Sabati first, because Monique, I'd then like you to answer for all different solutions. So Federica, from the European heating industry, what are your views on the decarbonisation of buildings? I believe you need to turn your microphone on. Sorry, we can't hear you. You could unmute your microphone. We can now hear you. If you wouldn't mind starting again, that would be great.
It was just thank you. It was just a thank you for yourself, and thanks for Eurogas for inviting us to talk about this, which is basically our daily bread. I think the numbers are known by now. Decarbonization of buildings is key to decarbonize Europe, to decarbonize the economy. It's a difficult sector to decarbonize. It has, however, 80% of the energy consumption in Europe comes from building, and 36% of the CO2 emissions are coming from the sector. So it's really an important part of the decarbonization path that we need to do. One element that is a bit missing, I think, from the public debate is how difficult it is to actually decarbonize buildings. Why is it difficult? It's of course because if you look around, you will see that you have a lot of different types of buildings. You have different types of insulation of buildings. You have different climate zones, energy infrastructure, and you have also different financial capabilities from consumers to renovate buildings. This makes it a complex a challenge, but also an opportunity, obviously, and something that we cannot miss if we want to reach the 2030, let alone the 2050 targets for CO2 emission reductions. So how do we see these targets as ambitious? Certainly, we also are optimistic as industry. We can get there. The technologies are there. And I think the political will, as we have heard again today, is there, which is very important. I think one thing for industry in general is the point that if you have a certainty of where you need to go, then at least you know where to go and how you get there, then it's going to be worked out. But to have clear goals, I think this is very important. And we heard it clear again today by Mr. Timmermans. As manufacturers of heating the technology that work with all types of energy carriers, except coal, I would say, we have been analyzing a little bit the situation, the market. We are aware of the supply chain, of the complexity of this market, and we figured out a vision on how to get there. I will not go through all of the points, but I think a couple are really relevant, particularly for the discussion that we are having today. The first one has been mentioned is the renovation of buildings, and particularly the renovation targets that we have. There's an important piece of an important strategy that's been coming out by the Commission. That's the renovation wave. That's the first time that we have a strategy for the renovation of buildings, because we had so far only standards set for new builds, but new builds are only 1% of, or just about 1% of the buildings in Europe. So really the challenge is on the renovation. And here we can see that the ambition of the Commission could be higher, perhaps should be higher. They're looking now at a 4% renovation rate per year. This is already today's renovation rate in terms of the replacement of the old heating installations that there are largely old and inefficient. So we think that the first step to do is really to accelerate this replacement. Otherwise, we don't get to 2030, we don't get to 2050 in terms of CO2 emission reduction. So first time is accelerating that step. That means investing also in skills. And this was mentioned. I think this is something that is missing a little bit from the public debate when you talk about energy, but it's somewhere else. It's really, really important to upskill and train even more of all that supply chain in Europe, which is very much local jobs that has to be skilled for the energy transition. And in our sector, that means many more installers, for example, that are the ones that are the contact between the technology manufacturers, for example, and the end user. As you know, you don't go to the supermarket to buy your heater. You need to have a professional that comes to you and that recommends it, that is able to also install whatever technology is fit for your building. So it's important that that person knows and has the training and knows all of the technologies that can fit both your home, but in a sustainable way. So I think this upskilling is really, really important there. With what do you want to replace the old installations, which are largely, as was said, based on fossil fuels at the moment? Well, the good news is that there is a lot of technologies that are actually fit for 2050. There is no such thing as a fossil boiler anymore. I would like to break that news to Thomas. Boilers are actually already able to work with green gases, whether it is biomethane, synthetic methane, and increasingly with hydrogen. This is very interesting, and this is why we think a part of the picture in the decarbonization of building will be also played by green gases. There will be an increased role for heat pumps. I totally agree with Thomas Novak on that one. And the electrification rate is certainly something that we will see growing, and we want to see growing, because of course they will give a lot of better and sustainable homes to Europeans. We also know, however, that in order to reach those 2030, 2050 goals, electrification is not enough. I mean, the most optimistic scenarios also from the Commission don't give more than 40% of direct electrification for building. This is why we need to have also other solutions that are fit for purpose. And at the moment, gas is the number one energy carrier for heating in buildings. So we need to decarbonize that as well, because there's going to be an increase in electrification, but it's not going to be enough. So what we are doing is, in order to break also the chicken and egg discussion, whether there is enough green gases or is there technologies that would work with green gases, we have developed technologies that work with green gases. and that goes from fuel cells was mentioned before, hydrogen boilers, boilers that work with blends, hybrids, micro cogeneration. There is really a lot already there in the market. As a last comment on that, and I will bring a comment that was made before by Dörte from Bosch. We need to move out of the laboratory. I have to say we have already moved out of the laboratory, and there is a Clean Hydrogen Alliance project that has been launched last year, and where we are active in. And one of the things that are coming out of this work of the Alliance is a mapping of all the projects on that use hydrogen for heating. And we are at mapping already now, after a few weeks of collection of projects, more than 70 projects in Europe that are, where you are using hydrogen for heating. Just to say, it's not a science fiction anymore. It's not just a laboratory thing for tech freaks. It's something that is really already out there and functioning. I think this is very interesting because it does give one more one more technology help in order to arrive to those very difficult 2030, 2050 targets. So team sport for us is really what's all about. It's many technologies, they all play a role, and they respond to the needs of different environments, different consumer interest capabilities. So very much supportive of this theme of today's conference.
All right. Okay, Federica, thank you very much. So let me just bring Federica and Thomas together on this one, so we can sort of, get to the crux of this one, because from what I understand, Federica, you're saying a team sport when it comes to different technologies as well, and basically not all the eggs in the basket of heat pumps, from what I understand you're saying. Thomas, you're very much, obviously, that's who you represent. You're representing heat pumps, but where do you feel Federica is wrong, or where do the two of you disagree?
I think that the two of us don't disagree so much. We are representing, of course, a huge spectrum of manufacturers, and they have different expectations on the market. So there is a truth in saying that if you are responsible for a factory where 75% of your output is boiler technology, and despite the fact that the boiler can burn something else, it will in the end, as of today, burn fossil energy sources. So I just want to make that clear equally. It's nice to say that it could burn something else, but it often doesn't. Then, of course, you have also an employment responsibility. And I think that's something that we are typically not talking so much about. What I said is that, technically speaking, it's feasible to replace most boilers in most buildings today. I'd say 60% go pretty much immediately. And if the renovation wave happens, then the rest of the 35 million least performing buildings will also be renovated. So that's one. And I think also our members, they all, if you ask them one by one, even the ones that we have jointly, they would say, yes, we see a great future in heat pumps. And then comes a different perspective. And some people say, well, we can't move that fast. So it's a lot about speed. Some people say it's too expensive. And it's true, as I said, a heat pump is more expensive today. But the reason for that is that the boiler technology is generously subsidized. If we would have a CO2 price that is 100 euros, let's say, which was deemed impossible a while ago, but the German Environmental Agency says the true cost of CO2 pollution is more 600 than 100, this discussion would be over. The end user is not stupid. They would understand that actually if they invest into a technology that is not decarbonizing fast, and that may actually even be more expensive, then they will not do it. And then you will find business models that make this reality. And what I'm hoping for, at least, is that our manufacturers, they are quick enough to change, and they would then say, oh, okay, Bosch said Monday morning, we can manufacture 1 million heat pumps. They can. That's not a problem. The question is the demand happening? And I think here we are representing opinions that there is not a single opinion at the moment. There is a big uncertainty about the cost of the fuel. We have heard it from the colleague from Equinor that he said it's much more expensive. So it's not going to be a cheap solution if you simply blend or if you simply replace. And I think we need to look at total cost of ownership, and then we would probably agree. And then we have a uniform perspective from the whole heating industry.
Okay, Federica, do you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, the cost issue is, of course, an important one. When we are looking at rolling out heat pumps much more, because that's, of course, also our goal, as you know, we have common membership, so that's really an interest for us to deploy that technology. We do face some hurdles that need to be tackled, and these are not only the presence of boilers in the market. That's killing one technology, and therefore, this is not the way you do it. The problem with the deployment, more massive deployment of heat pumps, are lying in a few areas. Number one, it's technology that costs a lot to the consumer. It's a technology that requires installers. I mentioned that before, architects, people that are in the business to actually know it, be able to install it. It takes normally 1 or 2 times more longer time for an installer of a heat pump to install that as opposed to a boiler. So that means we need to accelerate that skills part. That is a real hurdle in the market. We cannot look blindly at this. This is a real barrier. And of course, the electricity grid extension and expansion is an important problem as well, because the electricity grid needs to be expanded in order to arrive to the last mile, so that when you're plugging in your electric vehicle and you're plugging in your electric heating and you're plugging in all the electricity fired appliances in the house, you still have the service, and this is something that we are starting to really to work much closer with the electricity grid people to have. So these are some of the barriers that need to be tackled, that have actually make a difference in the market. One additional thing I would like to mention: we also think that there needs to be a CO2 price. But we also need to have at the same time policies that would support then the replacement of all the appliances in the market, because at the moment that you put a CO2 price and you still have inefficient appliances, what will happen is just an increase in the price of energy, and this will hurt particularly badly all those energy poverty households, or just like average households. So that is not a solution if it's just like this, but it needs to give a signal. But it needs to be supportive in any case of specific, parts of the population, the consumers. Otherwise, you have Gilets jaunes effect, and that makes total sense.
I think that's probably the perfect place to talk now about consumers. You talked about energy poverty. You've talked about those who are in different parts of our society, different parts of our community. So let me bring in Monique Goyens, who is from the BEUC. It's the European Consumer Organization. Monique, I'm sure there are many questions that you want to address, but if you would like to start with your opening statement, if you wish to, then I will hand over to you.
Okay, yes, good afternoon. I'm delighted to have been invited another time by Eurogas for a conference. However, I have to tell you, I'm afraid that I'm going to be invited for the last time today, because what I'm going to say might not necessarily please the colleagues from the gas sector. So I try to be at least polite, even if I don't necessarily agree. And I would certainly like to come back at the end of my presentation to what Federica just said about carbon pricing. This is a very important point for us, and on the distributional impact on households. Just a few contextual remarks. Consumers, households need to change their lifestyle if we want to be successful when it comes to climate change mitigation and the targets that have been set by the EU. The good news is consumers are willing to change their lifestyles. So that's not necessarily a given. However, there are 2 conditions for that. The sustainable choice must be the easy one and must be the affordable one. Those are the 2 key drivers of consumer choice. And so we need to assess all the different solutions that are being proposed on basis of those key factors. And there is one element I cannot insist enough on that, which is that if you read the first element that you need to take into account and that you need to prioritize when it comes to funding is you need to reduce the need for heating. full stop. And Thomas already mentioned it, it's energy efficiency. Renovate, invest massively into renovating your building, and then you reduce the need for energy, the energy demand. And there, Thomas already mentioned, it will save your energy bill. It will be good for the environment. It will make your house more comfortable. But I would add to that, it will make your home more healthy. So it's also a public health issue. So there are only good reasons to go into energy efficiency investments. And what we see there is that there are two key type of barriers. First of all, the price, the cost, of course, upfront cost of renovation is important. And there we really need funding models that are up to speed to the challenges. It's not only the poor, of course. I mean, the social housing is an important element, but it's also more affluent household who still needs to have attractive funding solutions. It's also the split incentives between tenants and landlords. All those elements need to be taken very quickly because we have a challenge in terms of emergency into consideration. The second the second barrier is the hassle, and Federica already mentioned that. It is not easy to renovate. I mean, it's a headache for most people. And they need support and they need advice. And that's also one of the problems. Who is a trustworthy supplier there? And we really would like to see in the context of the strategy that is going to be rolled out I hope in a few weeks' time. We call it a one-stop shop. It's really like a coaching facility where consumers can be supported during the whole journey towards renovation, between the initial step until the end of the project where all the works are being finished. That would be certainly something that would be the best way of getting consumers on board, because it's difficult to know what's good or what are the best products, what are the best solutions in the context of my house, what are the trustworthy suppliers, and is the price that is being asked the right one? So, I mean, that would be certainly something that is important to explore very quickly for us. The one-stop shop is, and that can, by the way, also be a support to the professionals. Would be a very good solution. Now, sometimes you still need heating, even if your house has been renovated. And we also agree that heating needs to be decarbonized. For the moment, 80% of households in Europe still heat with fossil fuels, and this needs to change rapidly. And as we know, you cannot really on the spot like that. It's not like changing from tomatoes to cabbage, because the season changes. It's a long-term investment, because if we want to address the target of 2050, we need to introduce the changes that consumers need to make in terms of investment into new appliances and into new systems in their house, because those appliances have a lifetime of 15 to 20 years on average. And so our message here is, in the context of this need to decarbonize heating of residential buildings, is that there exist already sustainable district heating solutions. There exist heat pumps. Let's explore further and let's promote those solutions, because they have been tested and they are most affordable. And I agree with Thomas. The total cost of ownership of a heat pump is much lower than that of, for example, a gas boiler, because they are much more efficient at the end of the day. The question is, of course, the upfront cost, and that needs to be tackled with funding models, with green loans or any other systems. So for us, this is very important. And we don't believe, and I only speak about residential heating, we don't believe in the promotion of hydrogen as a solution for consumers. Why? Because from our perspective, this is an untested technology, because have there been really trials in homes? What is about the safety? What is about the price? And when I speak about the price, it is not only the cost of the unit consumed, but it's also about the investment that needs to be made by the consumer to upgrade their equipment or to replace their equipment, depending on what needs to be done. And there, for the moment, it's a gray zone. It's as a consumer or as a let's say a private a customer, we have no real information and trustworthy information or consolidated information available. Also, it is not clear at all, and there are a lot of studies going on, and from our perspective, we don't know whether there is enough there is enough quantity of hydrogen to supply both the industrial and the transport sector, where this is even more key, and the residential sector. So we are not going to push consumers into investments when at the end of the day they will need to be locked in fossil fuels because the supply is not up to speed. As I already mentioned, we believe that the cost is too high for consumers from the consumer perspective with regard to the other solutions that already exist and that we believe should be promoted further. Now, speaking about energy poverty and carbon pricing, because there is now a very buzzy, if I can use that word, not sure whether that's correct in English, Sasha, about...
Fine, it works.
The extension of ETS to road and to transport and to building. And we believe that that's a very bad proposal because indeed it will be the low-income consumers who will be hit very, very hard because the part of their income that is dedicated to energy is higher than let's say the average consumer, and they cannot get out. They will be prisoner. They will be locked into the system of unsustainable lifestyle because they will not be able to do the energy efficient investments to get out of this high level of energy consumption. So we believe that, and of course you could say then that the ETS revenues will be earmarked. But we believe that won't happen because there will be so many important and legitimate calls for using those revenues, for example, for training SMEs into the new jobs into energy efficiency also. So we believe that carbon pricing can be something that needs to be used as a tool to give the price signals. So in order to decarbonize our consumption, but it should certainly not be an ETS-like style because the negative impact it will be very, very hard. And indeed, the yellow vest is a trigger because the yellow vest movement has been triggered by an increase of the fuel prices by 4 to 5 cents. While ETS, if it would be rolled out to the building sector, it would lead to a 20-cent increase. According to the scenarios. Can you imagine it would be a fluo yellow vest movement that could be really triggered there? And that's certainly not the signal that people need to get now. The population needs to understand that the European Union and the member states support consumers in their move towards more sustainable lifestyles. Thank you.
Okay, well, no, thank you very much. Let me give Federica the opportunity to come back in on that because there's a couple of points that you made there about how consumers feel towards blended gases, if I can just put it that way, within their systems and their boilers and the like, and how that works and whether that has been tested, but also on the ETS as well. Federica, do you want to pick up on any of that?
Yeah. On the technology, of course, what I was mentioning before, this is sort of 70 projects and counting because not all of them are working now, but they are planned for the next months. This is something that is tested in real houses, in real places, and here we are talking about with the Hydrogen Alliance, we are looking at 4 main let's say scenarios in which you would use hydrogen for heating. One is in grids that blend hydrogen into natural gas, biomethane, or synthetic gases. So depending on where it is and on the production, you have 100% hydrogen grids and technologies that work with that. You have district heating, so decentralized heat and electricity production, so cogeneration basically with district heating network, and off-grids decentralized heat and power. This is technologies that exist already, that has been tested, and it's not something that is as I said, just in the laboratory. So happy to catch up separately to send some more information about this, but this is something that is really existing. In terms of cost of the technology, we are making our estimates at the moment. For example, for hydrogen boilers or even hydrogen-ready boilers. Hydrogen-ready boilers would be a condensing boiler, basically, that you would use that would have a conversion kit, where therefore you would put it on the market as working with the current gas grid. When there is a conversion of the grid and you have hydrogen, you would change that conversion, that little kit, and put a new one for the cost of a couple of €100. Boiler itself would be in the price range of where is now a boiler. So the cost, the idea is we would only make it if it's actually realistic. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to create a new technology that is even more expensive than what we would already have. But it has to solve a number of problems and tick a number of boxes, which is the sustainability one, it's the price one, it's the affordability one, it's the life cycle cost, etc. So that's one thing. On the ETS, as industry, we don't have a specific opinion on whether buildings should be in the ETS. I know it was mentioned also earlier by the commissioner. I can only repeat what I said before. CO2 price is useful to give a signal. Is useful, but we're very concerned as well about just the increase in prices. This would not be useful, and certainly would not serve industry's interest either. So I think it's really, if it is given a signal, it needs to be coupled with the replacement of appliances, so that the cost of running, the cost of operations actually makes sense, and it's lower than before. Otherwise, it's more harmful than helpful.
Okay, I think what I did notice actually, Monique taking a lot of notes while you were talking. Maybe we should just get the pair of you together, and Monique, you can actually have a chat, and maybe it's a whole sharing information exercise that's needed. And Monique, you started by saying maybe you wouldn't be invited back. Well, that is obviously not for me to say, but I do know it's always nice to get some open and transparent discussion. So please don't ever think that. I'm very conscious of time ticking on. I'm going to very quickly take us to Portugal, and then I'm going to get some closing thoughts from all panelists. But it's a question about energy efficiency in Portugal, because Gabrielle, you talked very much about infrastructure and blending within the grid, but actually we've talked a lot about making sure houses are up to spec, and industry, and looking at that and the decarbonisation within those buildings. And I wonder whether there was anything from Portugal that you could share with our audience as to maybe what was working very well, or indeed what the situation was.
Thank you, Sasha, and I would like to jump on some topics that were mentioned. Very interesting, because I think all of the rest of my colleagues already touched on the topic about the renovation of the building. Even before we put any other equipment, any other changes of the equipment that is already there. Just sharing with you, 2/3 of the buildings existing in Portugal were built before 1990. So there is plenty of room for improvements in the insulation of those buildings. And this is a relevant topic. As you can imagine, Portugal is not as cold as other countries in Europe. We have that lucky, but nevertheless, and I think I'm not wrong, if it is not the second, it will be the third. It will be the second country in less temperature comfort in the buildings, on the residential. So there is plenty room, and I think the Portuguese government is addressing the topic correctly, because we are now with a long-term renovation strategy. And one of the priority topics is precisely to work on the improvements on the insulation of the buildings. That is one topic that I think is very relevant before we begin putting a lot of money and a lot of costs in new equipments or changing equipments, whatever. Another idea that I would like to share with you, and in Portugal, we already have on the hydrogen national strategy a target to achieve on 2030 to have 15% hydrogen injection on the network. So that is also one of the reasons why we need to run as much as we can to achieve this value. And sharing with you that the buildings energy consumption in Portugal accounts for circa 30% of the global energy consumption, so a little lower than in the rest of Europe, of course. And around, in this value, 18% is related with water heating. With a few calculations, just considering the change, just the change, it's the same equipment, older water boilers by new ones that are currently in the market. Also, the injection of 15% of hydrogen, plus the injection that we are forecasting for biomethane, that could deliver a 51% decrease on CO2 emissions related with water heating equipment. So this is a pathway that it's achievable. And I come back to the point that with the renovation of buildings, decreasing the energy demand, and with these minor fine-tunes, we can very fast approach some of these decrease for the CO2 emissions. Then, of course, also touch a little bit on the cost of the hydrogen. As I mentioned in the first example, we had in the Portuguese recent auction, prices that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it could be impossible. It would be nonsense. But I'd like also to say that maybe 10 years ago, if we talked about photovoltaic generation in the way we are, we could not imagine. So I think there will be a scale effect on several of the technologies that are being deployed, and also some improvement on the technologies for sure. So I think with work from all the teams, we will get for a reasonable and a sustainable cost. And so another topic also, because once again, I think that this is an effort that we need everyone around the table, with no one that should be left. As Thomas mentioned, the heat pumps will be a solution for several buildings, but there might be some buildings in which that might not be the best solution. If it works, it could not be the best solution. So taking the energy transition to everyone, that is also one of the reasons why we come to the first point. Renewable energy, we need to consider as renewable electricity and renewable gases. And for several places, renewable electricity with heat pumps or other solutions will be the best solution. But for other, the renewable gases can still play a relevant role. So one size does not fit all, and we need to address several solutions. The same way that when we think about the hydrogen binding targets, we won't think about all the network. I think there will be a very interesting framework in the future, because we will be addressing energy communities, and they will be different from each other. Even in a small country like Portugal, we have in the north colder situation. We have in the south more generation of renewables with photovoltaic. We have in other places more industry. So I think we will find solutions that will be different from place to place, from community to community. And that brings me once again to the first point. We should not close all the solutions only in one pathway. And that is precisely the reason why we think that not only the decarbonization can be achieved, not only with a full electrification pathway, but it will be sustainable also considering the zero carbon gas pathway.
Gabrielle, thank you very much. We are now running out of time, but I would like to end this panel in the way that I ended the first panel, and to ask you all in one sentence only, please, just one sentence. This time next year, pandemic aside, let's hope we're all in the same room. Let's look forward to that. But in one sentence, please, what you would like us to be discussing? What will be on the table in one sentence? And Federica, let me come to you first.
Yes, I think, do I have my, yes. Yeah, I think, I would love that we would still be talking about heating and renovation, because I think this brings only winners for the climate, winners for European innovation. This is a European technologies, there's a European supply chain, and this is for the recovery particularly.
Okay. Thomas, in one short sentence, please, what would you like to be talking about in a year?
I was planning the commas already to make that sentence as long as possible. But what I would like to discuss next year is support to what Monique said, these one-stop shops that we find are super important. So will we have, from the renovation wave and from the Ready for 55% package, role models for one-stop shops that are rolled out in every member state, support the end user, support the installer, support the industry to switch faster using a technology that we already have. And after the comma, hoping that this discussion about the electricity grid will disappear, because I talked to all the utilities and they say, and also the DSOs, they say this is not a problem. We plan this over 10 years and then we can solve it and we can react to an increased demand.
Okay, Gabrielle, with one sentence from you, this time next year?
Okay, so this time next year, I hope that we will be already seeing the first results to achieve our climate neutrality and the goals for 2030 through the renewable electricity and also with the renewable gases completely on the pathway.
Okay, thank you. And Monique, the final word from you. This time next year?
I would say that we move away from talking a lot about strategy and that we talk much more about rollout of those strategies in the most consumer-friendly way.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Monique Goyens, Federica Sabati, Thomas Novak, and Gabrielle Sousa. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for our panel on decarbonisation of buildings. And thank you for watching us. Thank you for all your questions, and thank you for your attention this afternoon. It just leaves me now to hand you back to James Watson at Eurogas.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Sasha. It was a great job as well. I really enjoyed the panels. You really got some good probing questions, and I think we had a rip-roaring ride. And I can tell you, of course, we knew Monique's position on gases before we invited her, so she doesn't have to worry. We love having people come onto our events with different views. It's our philosophy. We want to have a conversation. We want discussion. We certainly didn't invite Thomas Novak for his famous love of gas. So I think that we have to say this is very much about bringing people together, having a conversation, and talking about what's going on out there. So yeah, Monique's fears we can allay immediately. But Sasha, I want to say thank you to you again this year. Really great job. Always look up to you and look at the way you moderate and get the best out of the panelists. So thank you.
Thank you.
And the last thing for me to do today, ladies and gentlemen, or penultimate, I should say, the penultimate thing for me to do today is actually bring in somebody who has probably been listening to every word that's been said in the panels, and also to the visionary statements at the beginning from the Executive Vice President and indeed the European Parliament's point of view, because Katerina Sikov-Magny is a director in the European Commission's DG Energy, responsible indeed for the energy system integration and the Green Deal, green transition. And Katerina, your job will be to make sense of everything you hear and actually develop the legislative packages that we're also interested in this race to be fit for 55. And so we will give you the final word today. And we are very interested to hear your views and how you see this package unfolding and how you will be addressing the issues of renewable and low carbon gases, electrification, and indeed heating and cooling and buildings and all the other parts of the economy that you have to address. Katerina, the floor is yours, and welcome to our event.
Many thanks, James. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure to be here today to give you the closing remarks of a very intensive debate, very intensive discussion you have had today. And it was indeed a pleasure for me to listen to some of the panel discussions today. Of course, you have heard already this morning what our Executive Vice President Timmermans wanted to say on the topic. So I will only complement in a way from my perspective and where we are working then towards the Fit for 55 package, as it is called. So today we have heard a lot about the European decarbonisation efforts and about the role of gas that can play on our path to net zero emissions economy by 2050. So stabilizing our climate depends on reducing greenhouse gas emissions to net zero in a couple of decades only. And this in turn requires a far-reaching decarbonisation of our energy system. Today, natural gas constitutes around 95% of gaseous fuels that we use. Going forward, we need to see a rapidly decreasing role for natural gas in the EU energy mix. In many cases, the direct use of renewables, energy efficiency, and direct electrification will be the most efficient way to decarbonize. And we have heard some of those elements already today. In the policy scenarios that reflect the net zero ambition, natural gas consumption will be reduced by something like 66-71% by 2050 as compared to 2015. The use of unabated natural gas will become incompatible with the climate neutrality objective, and thus we need to reduce its use by more than 2/3 compared to 2015. Gases will, however, continue to be an important energy carrier. We will need molecules in addition to electrons. And in our scenarios that look at 2050, the energy carried by gaseous fuels would be equivalent to close to 90% of what is carried by natural gas today. This because electrification is economically difficult or can be technically not feasible in some areas, but also in some parts of industry, thinking of refineries or steel making, for instance, and also in some parts of transport. And here we can think about shipping, aviation, maybe long distance heavy vehicles, at least in the short term. But what is obvious is that these remaining gases must be new gases, and they must not be fossil gases. So biogas, biomethane, hydrogen, synthetic gases can provide sustainable options for decarbonization across a wide range of sectors, in particular the ones I mentioned, which are hard to electrify. However, the objective of promoting renewable and low carbon gases should not be seen in isolation as a self-standing objective. Gaseous carriers are one piece of the broader puzzle of an integrated energy system. So what needs to be done? Well, currently we see very little supply and also very little demand for renewable and low carbon gases, in particular hydrogen. So the creation of an ecosystem for renewable and low carbon gases requires, among other things, regulatory incentives that stimulate the necessary production and consumption. For us, our main focus will be on incentivizing the uptake of these renewable and low carbon gases in the gas market and development of an EU hydrogen market. So to this end, we are reviewing our legislation around the area and to see how to build this incentivizing regulatory framework. This approach started already last December when the Commission adopted the proposal to revise the 10E Trans-European Energy Networks regulation, and where it brings into the European domain the planning of integrated network that takes into account the needs of hydrogen and also takes into account the potential of local production of biogas and similar. So we will continue preparing legislation in 2021, so this year, by starting already this summer by proposing the so-called Fit for 55 package, which will include many pieces of legislation, all complementary to each other. I will only mention the review of the Renewables Directive in this area and also the review of the Energy Efficiency Directive, which are being prepared by colleagues in DG Energy. There will, of course, be other elements. There will be looking into how to improve the ETS, how to ensure sustainability through the land use approach, etc. So stay tuned for June. But after that, we will then continue the work on hydrogen and gas decarbonization, where there will be legal legislative proposals by the end of the year. And in addition, also proposals on how to reduce methane emissions, which methane being an even more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2 and must be abated rapidly. A public consultation is already ongoing on methane emissions, and we will publish the public consultation on the decarbonization of gases package quite soon as well. So please stay tuned on those and contribute to both consultations. That will be very important. Then a couple of words on today's discussion on the panels. Very interesting and useful and very lively So it has been a pleasure to listen to those. So the panels addressed certainly two very crucial elements of a successful European Green Deal. So first panel, winning the race. Our ambitious decarbonization agenda also creates opportunities for European businesses, which are very important and must be underlined. The European Green Deal, in the end, it is a growth strategy in addition to a decarbonization strategy. EU companies will be able to capitalize on the need to roll out our new energy technologies in all sectors of the economy. Supporting EU-based investment into climate-driven research and innovation is a key element of the EU's hydrogen strategy. And let me mention also from my side the Clean Hydrogen Alliance that was created indeed last year to look into project pipeline and investments in the area of hydrogen. So in terms of public support, then financial support, as 37% of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, meaning more than 300 billion euros in terms of grants and 360 billion in terms of loans, will be available for green and digital transition and climate-driven investments. This is huge, and this is then no excuse for anybody who has good projects to delay those projects and bring about the climate investments that we need urgently. So this recovery facility is the single most important instrument we have for green transition. Other sources at EU level include Just Transition Fund that with 17.5 billion, ensuring that the regions that have the biggest challenges are not left behind, and the people living in those areas receive the necessary support to replace the carbon-intensive production methods and coal-intensive methods as well. And then, of course, we have the Connecting Europe facility for the trans-European grids. But in comparison to the others, with its something like 5 billion, it is the smallest instrument here. Then moving to the panel 2 and the decarbonization of buildings, it is a very important area, and the building sector is vital to deliver the 2030 climate targets that we are currently upgrading to fit the 55% objective. Buildings are responsible for 40% of total energy consumption and 36% of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. And in order to reach the 55% emission reduction by 2030, buildings sector would need to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by something like 60% in comparison to 2015. So furthermore, energy consumption for heating and cooling should fall around 18% again compared to 2015. And as we heard, a large part in the EU overall, almost 75% of the existing building stock is deemed inefficient according to the state-of-the-art technology. And yet our renovation rates annually are around only 1%. So we really need to step up energy efficiency efforts significantly and employ all low carbon technologies for heating and cooling that are available as rapidly as we can. The renovation wave, as was mentioned by the panelists, has identified a range of measures and key enablers for the path towards the decarbonization. By the end of the year, we will complement the renovation wave by revising the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, where more measures, more concreteness will be then brought into the table. So with this short words, I would simply want to highlight two last points. So with so many initiatives in the pipeline, so much to do. We need to work together. All of you who were here today, and more broadly, all stakeholders and citizens and businesses, we need to work together in order to get the regulatory framework right, get the investments upstream in the pipeline, and get the investments done. But then my second last point is about citizens and affordability. It is crucial that we plan the transition in such a way that we have our citizens with us. We will only succeed if we bring the citizens to carry out all the investments that need to be carried out, that we give them added value for their efforts, and we make sure that they support the Green Deal investments and challenges with us together. So thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, James.
And really, yes, what a tremendous amount of work that you've just outlined. Really, it's almost mind-blowing, the sheer scale of what is being undertaken to address this real existential challenge of climate change that we are facing. And so, yes, the legislative agenda is huge. And you finished with a very good point in a way. We need to do all this all together. And certainly we in Eurogas definitely see it like that. This is definitely a united approach that we need to have. A united approach where we bring sectors together with the same common interests and indeed attempt to address all of the different points that have been raised today in winning the race in terms of technology, indeed in buildings, but beyond that in all the different sectors you've also mentioned, in transport and in power and in industry. And so we really do think that there is a tremendous amount of work that will need to be done, and it's certainly reflected in the package that you've outlined for us there, Katarina. And so we wish you and your team a huge amount of luck and fortitude as well, as we said to Executive Vice President Timmermans, to get that done, to get that moving. It's really been a very, very fast-moving agenda, we would say, policy agenda in the last year and a half. And so, as I said, we in Eurogas fully behind the direction that's being pushed. We would like very much to be there, to be seen as a good, supportive player in this whole process. I'll finish by saying one thing. In terms of energy system integration, Eurogas will be working with 16 other associations. Next Tuesday, on the 30th of March, we'll be launching the European Net Zero Alliance with a group of organisations who are all pushing for those same objectives. And I'd seriously encourage everyone in the European Commission to take note, and all of the viewers as well at home. This is an important platform which is bringing synergies between end users, different vectors, technologies, heating technologies, in power technologies, and indeed vectors such as electricity and gas and renewable powers. So, Katarina, I thank you greatly for joining us this evening. It is now this evening, it's after 6. And I wish you a very pleasant evening, and we look forward to seeing the fruits of your labour in the coming months, and you can count on our responses for the public consultations. Have a good evening. Thank you, Katarina. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of what has been an absolutely fantastic event with huge amounts of good discussion, great interventions. We've had vision. We've had requests for how the gas industry should behave. We've had a lot of views on what we can do with the different types of technologies that we produce. There are some great little sound bites that I can take away. Things like green hydrogen and blue hydrogen are not fighting against each other. They are both needed and should be seen to be working together. This is a very important message, I think, that we need to have for the future of how we grow the gas system, that we see the need for all of the different types of gaseous fuels that will help us achieve our objectives. Another very good one from the second panel was that there's no such thing as a fossil boiler, sorry. And that's actually very true. It only depends what you're actually burning within it. And with the opportunities that have been laid out by people like Gabriel Sousa and by Dirta Schramm from Bosch, you can really see that there's a tremendous opportunity also for renewable gases to be used and low carbon gases to be used in buildings and in heating. And these are options that should not be excluded. We have heard from lots of different people. We've heard the points of the consumers. We've heard the points of the heat pumps. Indeed, we've also had the unions in today. And I think that for my final point, I would say the one thing that I think united everybody is the idea that this has to be a just transition. And what we mean by that is that nobody should be left behind. No communities left behind. Transitions that have taken place in other sectors, in other parts of the world, have resulted in tremendous devastation of communities. We will not succeed in the Green Deal if we do not bring the communities with us, and we need the unions, we need the consumers, we need the voice of people to back what we are trying to achieve to make sure that it is successful. And ladies and gentlemen, if we take Katarina's final word and say that we want to work together, in Eurogas we show it every day. We invite all of the different voices to come to our annual conferences because we want to work together, which is why we're getting involved in ENZA, the European Net Zero Alliance, because we believe that only together will we solve the problems. And with the role of natural, renewable and decarbonised gases, we will do this in the most cost-effective way. I'll finish by saying thank you to Sasha. Fantastic job as ever. It's been great to have Sasha back. Thank you to all the panelists. Everybody put forward really good points of view. It was a strong discussion, strong debate, and that's why we have them. So thank you so much to the panelists. Of course, to the keynotes that we've had and the vision statement, to the President and the Vice President who came today to offer their questions and their insights. And of course, to the Eurogas team, because none of this would have been possible without all of the great hard work and effort that they've made. And so I show great appreciation to them. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, for you, for spending your afternoon with us. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it useful. Drop us a line, send us a tweet. We're always willing to engage. We want to hear from you. We hope you found it good. We certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. And we hope to see you again next year when we'll be able to talk again about how we are moving forward in a world where gas will be and is fit for 55. Thank you very much and good night.